Imagine spending your entire day lifting weights, only to return home completely drained, with your only source of joy being a virtual reality game. This game promises that whoever completes it will earn limitless wealth. Finally, after beating the game, over 1 million lands in his bank account. He goes to sleep content, but upon waking, he discovers that monsters have invaded the world. The game has turned into reality, and he is the only one who knows everything about it. Determined, he sets out to hack the system. The story begins on a bright morning under clear skies. Someone is seen wearing virtual reality glasses, breathing heavily and drenched in sweat. Within the game, they are congratulated for completing the final test as the sole player to finish it. Overjoyed, they ask if they've truly completed everything, while a pixelated game screen appears. Someone mentions a scam game. They explain that this is what Prophecy Online, the VR game, was often called. It was a highly advanced VR experience, immersive, action-packed, and compatible with resolutions as high as 16K. It was an open-world online RPG where players could feel, smell, and hear everything. This was Prophecy Online. The game promised a reward of infinite wealth that couldn't be spent even in 1,000 years. At first, no one believed such claims. He admits he was one of the skeptics, playing the game casually while ignoring its money-grabbing aspects. But Endo recalls that everything changed that day. He remembers someone at his job telling the team to take a break. It was an ordinary day at work. He asked if they'd be clearing debris that afternoon. After struggling to find stable work, he had taken a part-time job as a construction worker, stuck in a monotonous cycle of toiling under the hot sun and enduring scolding from older coworkers. Suddenly, Endo received a message on his phone from the Prophecy Online administration. Surprised, he noticed it was related to the game and wondered if he had forgotten to disable email notifications. The message congratulated him for achieving first place in the beta test and informed him that the reward would be deposited into his account. Smiling, Endo doubted its legitimacy, assuming it was just another scam email. Still, he decided to check his account. As he looked at his phone, he thought it was impossible for anything to be deposited. To his shock, he found 1 million yen in his account. Just then, a coworker approached him, asking for his help after the break. Concerned, the man touched his shoulder and asked if he was feeling okay. Without a word, Endo suddenly bolted, laughing uncontrollably, leaving his colleague bewildered and calling after him. Running with hope, Endo wondered if this was real, if he could genuinely make money from the game. He questioned whether the promise of a reward so vast it couldn't be spent in 10,000 years could actually be true, spurring him to dive headfirst into the opportunity. The game was merciless and unforgiving, treating its players as expendable sacrifices. The tower's guardian would erase defeated players along with their data. In the dungeon, the tower's exit was always randomized, and the most harrowing part of the experience was the physical pain inflicted on players when their characters were injured. This constant confrontation with the fear of death caused many to quit. Yui barely managed to cover his living expenses through a part-time job. To continue playing, he fell into debt, taking out loans from both banks and loan sharks. Now, he had no choice but to wait for the promised unlimited assets that supposedly couldn't be exhausted in 10,000 years. When he finally completed the game, he was greeted with a simple congratulatory message, stating that his true reward was the experience. Exhausted, he began removing his VR headset, incredulous that he had actually finished it. Dropping everything, he grabbed his phone, desperate for the promised reward. Opening the email from the Prophecy Online team, he read that they had recently achieved their goal and, as a result, the game would be discontinued. Angry, Endo wondered what would happen to his reward while skimming through the message thanking the game's sponsors. Feeling sick, he dropped his phone, which shattered as it hit the floor. Kneeling, he questioned whether he would ever receive the reward he had been promised. The day remained sunny, and the neighborhood peaceful, as if his despair meant nothing to the world. Trying to console himself, he reasoned that a large sum of money might take time to process. Exhausted, he collapsed onto his bed, deciding he would check again the next day. The following morning, checking his phone, he found no updates beyond the initial deposit of 1 million yen. Admitting defeat, he regretted not giving up sooner. A week later, he was startled awake by a loud noise. He looked at his phone, realizing the sound wasn't coming from it. Glancing up, he saw a system window before him. Notifications announced the failure of the ice trial and the destruction of Moscow. The next trial, the Earth trial, had a 43-day time limit, with Japan designated as the test site. Confused, he turned on the TV, where terrified journalists reported on the devastation in Moscow, now overrun by monsters. The Russian government confirmed there were no survivors. The creatures, identified as dragons, were wreaking havoc across the city. A helicopter broadcasted live footage of the destruction, and a journalist on board described the scene. Suddenly, a dragon opened its mouth, appearing to target the helicopter. Desperate cries ordered the crew to retreat, but contact was lost. The presenter in the studio, visibly shaken, called out for the journalist, only to be met with silence. A geologist on the broadcast dismissed the idea of monsters, attributing the disaster to tectonic activity. However, as the footage showed the dragon's assault, the specialist fell silent, horrified. Meanwhile, on his balcony, the protagonist watched the chaos unfold. Despite the insanity of the situation, he felt an eerie sense of calm. With absolute clarity, one thought dominated his mind. Elsewhere, a woman attempted to understand the system, pressing buttons to explore the interface. The protagonist also interacted with the system, confirming the time limit of 43 days and Japan's status as the test site. Seeing no progress made, he recalled the game's message about his experience being priceless. He concluded that the priceless assets referred to by the game were his knowledge and expertise, realizing he was the only person to have fully completed Prophecy Online. Suddenly, after a long time, his door swings open dramatically. A young man steps out, confident, with a sly grin. He declares that it's time to get his money. While running, he comments that with the game becoming real, the competition for spots and experience points will become fierce. Still sprinting, he notices the nearest dungeon just ahead. Ender dashes toward a large building, observing people frantically running and panicking, wondering aloud how they can escape since buses and trains are no longer operational. Rushing anxiously, he keeps moving until someone abruptly yells at him to stop. A man blocks his path, leaving the protagonist startled. The man asks Ender if he plans to ignore all his reminders and run off. Recognizing the man, Ender realizes it's one of the loan sharks pursuing him. The loan shark states he was on his way to Ender's house and orders him to turn around. He flicks a cigarette at Ender's face. A year ago, while inside a dungeon, Ender saw an advertisement from a company offering 200,000 yen interest-free to those who passed their selection process. However, they demanded 50% of all rewards earned. Thinking it was a great deal, Ender accepted, knowing he'd only need to repay it after completing the game. But after spending the 200,000 yen, he was informed he hadn't passed the selection. Ender was then told he'd need to repay the loan with 50% interest within 10 days. He recalls the moment a gun was pointed at him. From that day on, he began borrowing from banks to cover his debts. However, when he tried to pay, they brushed him off, letting the interest pile up. Smirking, the loan shark asks if Ender has the money to pay his debt. Annoyed, Ender retorts by questioning how he could pay if they never answered his calls. The man accuses him of lying, saying that people who don't want to pay always make excuses and calling him pathetic. Still grinning, the loan shark says he's lucky to be there for another reason. He asks if Ender hasn't been playing that game, Prophecy Online. The man points out how the current state of the world mirrors the game exactly. Grabbing Ender by the shirt, he demands to know if Ender has any useful information, warning him to spill everything. Ender coldly orders him to take his filthy hands off. Growing angrier, the loan shark questions if Ender knows who he's talking to. Ender smirks and tells Takeo he'll give him something valuable instead. Activating his skill, Novice's Fist, Ender makes the loan shark stumble back. Takeo powers up his fist by 50% and begins unleashing a barrage of punches on the man. The strikes are so powerful that the loan shark is sent flying into a traffic sign. Gazing at the unconscious and bleeding man lying on the ground, Ender remarks that from now on, he's the one in charge. Seeing Takeo incapacitated, Ender comments that it looks like the loan shark can't heal himself either. He simply leaves Taku behind and continues sprinting toward his goal. Watching from inside a car, a man in a black hood remarks that these must be game abilities. With his face partially obscured, he admits he didn't expect to encounter someone so experienced this early. Smirking, the man muses that soon law and order will crumble, making things much more entertaining. The protagonist arrives at a location called the Goat Sanctuary. Something catches his attention. He notices a car parked nearby and wonders if someone has already beaten him there. Ender begins descending into the deep, dark dungeon. Wandering through its corridors in search of something, he is suddenly struck by the strong scent of blood. To his surprise, he comes upon dozens of dead lizard men. The same hooded man and his group notice this and deduce that someone else has arrived. Looking at Ender, the man asks if he's also a prophecy player. A bit annoyed, Ender asks if the group is responsible for the carnage. The hooded man explains that those were high-level monsters, and without his intervention, Ender would already be dead. Ender questions whether the lizards were really high-level, recalling that their level is among the lowest of the low. Removing his hood, the man comments that Ender seems to have no allies, then asks if he'd like to join his group. He explains that Ender would need to give up half of his earnings but, in exchange, he'd gain protection from someone very strong. The group behind the hooded man appears charmed by his proposal. However, Ender declines, stating he prefers to work solo. Gesturing ahead, Ender asks if they even think they can get past the boss. The group looks uneasy at the thought. The hooded man speaks to his group, questioning whether it's worth sparing Ender after defeating the boss. This makes the group nervous. He coldly states that the fewer people who know about the game's secrets, the better. He decides that anyone disagreeing with him will meet an unfortunate accident. The tension in the air grows as the group begins to feel uneasy. The man informs his subordinates that the boss here is the Ember Goat and orders them to ensure Ender doesn't land the final blow. With only 5 minutes until the door opens, some of the group approaches Ender. Surprised, he notices a girl and 2 men moving toward him, looking nervous. Smiling, Ender asks if they're trying to stop him. Hesitantly, they agree, telling him he should stay put. Ender thinks to himself that he could easily throw them aside but decides to let it slide this time. As the door finally opens, Ender determines it's not too late. He'll wait for most of them to perish before stepping in to defeat the boss. Once the countdown ends and the door opens fully, he casually takes out a juice from his inventory, leaning against the wall and biding his time. Hearing the gates close behind them, Ender peers into the boss room, curious to see how far they'll manage to go. Inside, the leader notes that it's convenient Ender didn't join them. The girl suggests that perhaps Ender realized their intent to kill him, but the leader dismisses the idea, claiming he isn't smart enough to figure that out. Ahead of them lies a vast, empty hall illuminated by a single beam of light streaming through a crack in the ceiling. The light lands on the shield of one of the subordinates. The leader orders him to proceed with his role. The subordinate remarks that with his shield, the boss wasn't supposed to be a problem. Addressing the leader as Sir, someone lit a candle, its purple flames flickering in the wall sconce. Suddenly, a powerful wind gusted through the room, leaving everyone disoriented. To their shock, a massive fire tornado materialized before them. The leader, gripped with terror, began questioning what kind of situation this was. His thoughts were cut short when a large paw emerged from the flames. That's when he recognized the creature, the Hellfire Goat. The monster was an unholy amalgamation of a goat, wolf, horse, and other beasts. Letting out a deafening scream, it unleashed shockwaves and flames in every direction. Warriors cried out as another devastating attack struck, sending Light and some of his subordinates crashing into the entrance door. He cursed under his breath, questioning how it had all gone so wrong, with the creature now looming over him. A frightened girl asked what they should do, and in frustration, he snapped at her to be quiet, ordering everyone to retreat. One of his subordinates shouted that the door was sealed. Impossible, the leader barked, trying to make sense of the situation. Yelling, he commanded some of them to distract the creature, insisting the shield could block its attacks. The shield bearer hesitated, trying to voice his concerns, but Light ignored him and ordered him to follow through. Reluctantly, the man positioned himself before the creature, shield raised. The beast lifted its hammer and, with terrifying force, brought it down. The shield bearer was crushed, his lifeless body sprawled on the ground. The group froze in terror as the creature bent down, picked up the man's shield with its clawed fingers, and, to their horror, began chewing it effortlessly. Unbelievable, someone muttered, pointing out that the shield was of epic-level quality. Light realized something was horribly wrong. The creature they were supposed to face was low-level, easily manageable for their team. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He recalled the game's history and trembled as he pieced it together. This was the Hellfire Goat from the original version of the game, a monster no player had been able to defeat. It hit him, this world followed the game's initial version, before any updates or adjustments. Desperate, Light remembered the protagonist, Yu, who was outside the door. Perhaps he could open it. The leader banged on the door, begging you to unlock it, promising to share the rewards. Predictably, there was no response. Frustrated, Light yelled for you to answer, but his rant was interrupted when something whizzed past him. He turned to see the monster barreling through his remaining subordinates, scattering them like rag dolls before advancing toward him. Once again, Light and his group were thrown violently, left battered and broken. Staring at the beast, he muttered about its absurd strength, realizing their annihilation was inevitable. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and you stepped inside. Is that all you've got after all that bragging? He mocked, a proud smirk on his face. He derided Light, saying he lacked the talent to lead. Still seething with resentment, Light internally cursed you, determined to use him to escape this nightmare. Light called out to his subordinates, ordering a retreat. You, however, tripped the girl as she tried to flee, casually warning her it wasn't a good idea. She fell to the ground, realizing in despair that the door was closing behind her. The protagonist looks at the so-called leader as Light dashes toward the door, desperately hoping to make it through. Suddenly, Light lets out a scream as the door slams shut, crushing his arm. The monster approaches the leader, calling him a noisy brat. Preparing to attack, it declares that the boy is irritating and it will end his life right there. Light glances back and sees the monster coming toward him. Suddenly, blood splatters across the room. Witnessing the horrifying scene, the girl and the man who tried to stop the protagonist are struck with fear, unsure of how they can face such a creature. Picking up the sword lying on the ground, Indu remarks that what needs to be done is obvious. Raising the sword, he comments that while Light was weak, at least he had a good weapon, and that's enough for someone like him. The monster, now preparing its hammer, asks if the protagonist is so eager to die. It swings with tremendous force, sending stone fragments flying in every direction. In a blink, the protagonist appears on top of the monster, ready to counterattack. Smiling, he asks the creature what it was saying. In a flash, Indu delivers swift cuts, striking the monster in multiple spots. It screams as its horns fall to the ground. Light's former subordinates watch in terror, awed by Indu's strength. Calmly, Indu turns to them and asks what they think. Once again, the cunning protagonist declares that if they pay him 10 million yen, he might consider saving them. The frightened pair look at him, unsure if he's serious. Both the girl and her companion shout, asking if he's truly demanding 10 million. Indu confirms it, adding he's only charging 1 million per person. Annoyed, they argue that no one carries that kind of money and accuse him of exploiting the situation. Indu responds that if they don't have money, they can repay him with their efforts. He asks if they really want to die so young. Finally, he proposes they work for him, giving him 90% of their earnings. The girl yells, calling him a fool, while her friend points out that even Light only charged 50%. Behind them, the monster rises again, more furious than before. It demands to know who dared to cut off its precious horns. Yelling in rage, it launches a massive fireball, shouting that they should perish 1,000 times over. The girl casts a spell in an attempt to shield herself, while the protagonist leaps through the flames. Both are thrown back by the impact, landing hard. Indu calmly lands in front of them with a grin, remarking that they managed to survive, this time. He wonders aloud how long their luck will last. Defeated and desperate, the pair agree to work for him, begging for his help. Pleased, Indu grins and declares they've struck a deal. Glancing at the monster, he adds that it's been a long time since he last defeated it. The monster, now irritated, says it doesn't recall ever losing to someone like him. The group stares, confused, as they explain that the Hellfire Goat was supposed to have been removed from the game before anyone defeated it. Without responding, Indu glares at the monster with determination. He recalls how, before the update, he had defeated the Hellfire Goat. He mentions hearing rumors that it had been transformed into the Blaze Goat. With a single swing of his sword, the protagonist deflects the monster's attack. The creature stares in disbelief, unable to comprehend how he managed it. Indu's new subordinates watch in awe, questioning who he truly is to have stopped the creature so effortlessly. The protagonist admits to the monster that if its attack had landed, he would have been killed instantly. However, he adds that its attacks aren't dangerous once you know their patterns. The monster keeps attacking, but Indu dodges and blocks each strike with ease. The monster grows increasingly agitated, questioning how this could be happening, while the protagonist moves behind it, sword in hand. Indu manages to strike the monster in the eye, remarking that its attack patterns are identical to those in the game. Stepping away from the fray, he notices the new subordinates cheering him on, encouraging his efforts. Annoyed, Indu tells them to quiet down, prompting one of them to call him irritating. Suddenly, a powerful attack whizzes past Indu, startling him. The monster slams its massive hammer into the ground, acknowledging the protagonist's impressive evasion skills but declaring that it ends now. Cornered with his back against the wall, Indu sarcastically asks the Hellfire Goat if trapping him was its plan all along. Ignoring the question, the monster demands to know his last words. With a smirk, the protagonist tells it to drop dead, taunting that it can't even land a hit. Furious, the monster vows to fulfill his wish. Summoning flames around itself, the creature opens its mouth, forming a massive core of black fire at its center. The subordinates look on, bewildered, as they wonder about the flames. Indu explains that this is the monster's ultimate attack, a flame so powerful it can kill even a level 99 player instantly. It incinerates everything, leaving no escape. With a gleam in his eye and a grin, Indu confidently says it's no big deal. He's been waiting for this moment. Activating his Nas kick skill, Indu channels just 50% of his strength, creating a blinding flash as he leaps toward the monster. He observes that while the attack is powerful, it leaves the user completely vulnerable. Furthermore, he notes that the monster's mouth is nowhere near as strong as the rest of its body. Using the ceiling for momentum, he positions himself and drives his sword downward, stabbing the monster's mouth shut. The Hellfire Goat collapses, desperately trying to open its mouth as its flames consume it from within. Exhausted, Indu explains that once this ability is triggered, it cannot be stopped. There's nothing left for the monster but to succumb to the fire ravaging its body. Jumping back to a safe distance, he taunts the creature, asking if it can survive its own flames. From afar, the others watch in disbelief as the monster is consumed. Indu bids it farewell as it finally opens its mouth, letting out a dying scream. Moments later, the Hellfire Goat is reduced to a charred husk. A system notification appears, confirming that the unique boss, the Hellfire Goat, has been defeated. The girl and the guy, still in shock, marvel at how the protagonist emerged unscathed. The system congratulates him, announcing that he is the first player to defeat a unique boss and awarding him the title of First Slayer. Though a bit confused, as he doesn't recall such a title in the game, Indu listens as the system explains its effects, a 50% damage boost when fighting bosses. As an additional reward, he is given the opportunity to select a secondary occupation. The system warns that this choice is permanent. With determination, Indu selects the occupation of Soul Smith. Extending his arm, he makes his choice resolutely. Suddenly, a bright light envelopes his body. Smiling, he remarks that it seems he's about to make a fortune. Collecting the boss's drops, he finds a dagger and a key. The girl informs him it's the key to the underground sewer, a perfect place to quickly level up and earn money. The man accompanying her adds that their initial objective was the ultra-rare drop the boss had. Spinning the key on his finger, Indu explains that this item isn't as rare as they think. In fact, the drop rate for the Hellfire Goat is 100%. They're horrified by how casually he dismisses an item that's considered so hard to acquire. Examining the dagger, he remarks it must have been pure luck to obtain it. Walking over to the rubble, Indu points the blade. Sparks of yellow and blue energy emerge. With a simple downward flick of his hand, he slices through a piece of rubble. His subordinates watch in disbelief, asking what's so special about the dagger. Shrugging, he says it's still not quite good enough. Activating his secondary occupation ability, he hopes the necessary materials will be simple to find. While secondary occupation might sound optional, Indu clarifies it's actually essential. The Soulsmith occupation allows him to use small soul fragments to create or enhance items, making it the only occupation that ensures progression to the endgame. He activates his soul sight ability and examines the dagger, discovering it can be awakened with a soul fragment from an F-type mage. Glancing at the girl, he identifies her as a mage and realizes he can extract the fragment by forming a contract without any harmful consequences. Regretting that he agreed to take only 90% of their earnings, he thrusts the dagger into the ground, saying there's still something useful to be gained. Turning to the pair, he asks if they still want the key to level up. Confused, they ask if he's really willing to give it up. Indu replies that in exchange, they'll have to provide all the items on a specific list, slightly reducing the fee they owe him. Overjoyed, they eagerly agree and thank him profusely. Indu tells them there's no need to thank him, after all, the more they earn, the more he profits. Meeting the extraction conditions, he successfully acquires the soul fragment from the F-type mage. With the required materials, Indu activates the Soulsmith ability again, commanding the sword to awaken. The blade begins to glow as fragments swirl in a tornado of energy, turning its surface a deep purple. Raising the newly awakened sword, Indu notices he's gained a new skill, Soul Slash. Testing the ability, he slashes forward, cutting through everything in his path. The attack is so powerful that it cleaves through the warehouse walls, revealing a forest beyond. His subordinates gape at the massive crater left by the strike, overwhelmed by the display of strength. Everyone stares in awe at the power unleashed by a single move. Collapsing to the ground, they wonder if such strength is even humanly possible. Examining the dagger, Indu notes that this is likely its limit. Turning to the girl, Indu says he now has a weapon and a basic set of skills, enough to take the next step. Walking toward her, he stops abruptly, causing her to flinch. Ruby quickly covers her face, thinking he's about to kill her. To her surprise, Indu walks past her without a word, leaving her confused. He crouches in front of the bodies of his subordinates' former companions and begins to pray. Ruby watches Indu intently, initially thinking he's mourning the fallen players. However, the reality is far less noble. Indu is simply looting their wallets. With a sly grin, the little thief jokes about how much money the players had on them. Both Ruby and another observer conclude that Indu is far more dangerous than the Hellfire Goat. Meanwhile, black feathers fall gently from the sky, blanketing the area around a shrine. A flock of crows circles above as Indu approaches the gate. Calmly, he makes his way to a nearby well, descending the worn stone stairs. As he moves deeper, he mentions that beneath the well lies a horde of monsters, typically tackled by groups of 3 or more. However, Indu is unfazed, pointing out that he has the goat dagger, giving him the confidence to take on the challenge alone. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, he pauses to observe his surroundings. The silence is broken by the sharp sound of a coin flipping through the air toward him. Reacting swiftly, Indu slices the coin in half before it can make contact. Instantly, he assumes a battle stance, dagger poised. He glares ahead, his irritation growing as 3 men emerge from the shadows. One of them, wearing a menacing expression, mocks Indu for entering the area uninvited. He declares the space as theirs. Pointing his weapon at the group, Indu sarcastically asks who decided that. The leader smugly responds, stating that whoever arrives first gets ownership, calling it a basic rule of the game. Another man suggests they'll let Indu use the dungeon if he pays a fee. Realizing these men operate similarly to him, Indu asks for the price. They demand 50,000 yen per hour, reasoning that even with the payment, Indu would still turn a profit. Begrudgingly, Indu hands over the money, and the men thank him while informing him that his hour starts now. Venturing deeper into the dungeon, Indu arrives at the wolves' cavern. A sudden howl echoes through the space as a white wolf charges toward him. Before he can fully assess the situation, dozens of wolves surround him. Calmly, he remarks that these are diamond wolves, mid-level monsters known for being lucrative. He notes that this cave is the only place where they appear in such large numbers. Though he considers using the soul blade, he decides it's unnecessary for now. In an instant, the pack lunges at him. With unparalleled skill, Indu counters their attack, weaving through the fray and cutting down the wolves with ease. Moving gracefully, he slashes through their ranks, leaving a trail of lifeless bodies in his wake. Once the battle ends, he sits among the corpses, taking a moment to catch his breath. Smirking, he mutters that the effort wasn't as rewarding as he had hoped. Suddenly, one of the men from the dungeon's entrance appears behind him, weapon raised, ready to strike. The protagonist successfully blocks his opponent's attack, swinging his dagger in response. To his surprise, the man dodges the strike, but the attack hits the ceiling, causing a massive explosion. The enemy, with a cut on his forehead, acknowledges how dangerous that was. The protagonist observes that the man managed to avoid his attack, despite the difficulty, showing his combat skill. The player tells the big guy that he apparently chose to play dirty, as he waited for him to kill the monsters and lower his guard. The opponent grins madly, saying he enjoys it. The protagonist deduces their real goal is to wait for other players to gather gear, then kill and rob them. Overhearing this, the group leader smirks, acknowledging the protagonist figured it out. The protagonist comments that this is a secret spot used by everyone, so it would be strange if they were the only ones there. Yu says that if they wanted to deceive him, they should have at least planned a fake round. The player admits he only realized this after seeing their weapons. He notices the big guy is wearing knuckle dusters with rocket punches, risky but enhances speed. He also points out the skinny guy's sword, which cuts through vibrations, and the ring on the leader's finger, a problematic item. The leader apologizes for the misunderstanding and offers compensation for the trouble, tossing hundreds of coins toward the protagonist. Yu is startled as the coins fall, but he's also furious inside, thinking the guy is throwing 10,000 yen around carelessly. The man's ring glows as he says his hand slipped and asks you to pick up the coins for him. Noticing the trap, the protagonist asks if it's really worth making his enemy kneel. He explains that the ring's ability causes small explosions with the coins and wonders if his enemies are underestimating him. As he throws his dagger into the air, the protagonist says they can't leave alive after targeting someone of higher rank. The 3 enemies gather in front of him and ask if you forgot it's 3 against 1. Preparing his dagger, the protagonist says even together they wouldn't be worth 1 yen. Enraged, the leader curses at him, glaring fiercely. The man snaps his fingers, triggering the explosion ability. A large blast follows, and the leader orders his subordinates to dismember him. The big guy moves behind you, positioning himself to strike. With difficulty, the protagonist dodges the attack. While still in the air, something catches his attention. It's the skinny guy saying he's not very good at holding back. The protagonist blocks the skinny guy's sword while the big guy lands several punches on his back. To everyone's surprise, the player makes a single move, throwing both of them away. Looking at the leader, the protagonist says that apparently, the deal not to bother him for 50,000 yen is broken, so he'll charge them back with interest. The leader unleashes a series of attacks toward the protagonist while smiling, claiming he'll pay him back with interest. Explosive coins rain from above. Meanwhile, the skinny opponent attacks from above. With remarkable ease, the protagonist blocks the furious strike, but the attacker's confidence turns to terror as his sword shatters upon impact. Before he can grasp what's happening, the protagonist counters with another strike. Watching the scene, the leader begins to wonder if the protagonist's dagger is truly a rare item. As you fights against the three of them, the leader considers it all to be within expectations, convinced that they won't lose to someone like him. Quickly, you maneuvers to dodge the explosions again, his irritation growing as they toss money around like it holds no value. The big guy appears behind him once more, attempting to land a heavy blow. The protagonist evades the attack, triggering a massive explosion. The blast is so intense that even the big guy's allies are forced to shield themselves. The protagonist's blade spins through the air, almost signaling his defeat. Believing the battle won, the big guy begins celebrating, calling it a great challenge, while his comrade advises him to learn to hold back. The skinny one, gripping his broken sword, begrudgingly admits that the visitor was indeed powerful. Suddenly, Indu activates his soul restriction ability, binding both the skinny man and the big man in chains, leaving only the leader unrestrained and terrified. Both captured men scream in agony as the chains tighten around them, while the concerned leader shouts their names. Emerging from the mist, the protagonist explains that he used his soul smith ability to inflict unbearable pain. Enraged, the leader charges at Indu, wielding the goat dagger. Before he can even position himself, Indu grabs him, mockingly calling him slow. Furious, the leader declares that he won't lose and jumps back, unbuttoning his coat to release a flurry of coins. Confidently, the leader commands Indu to be amazed. However, Indu, now even angrier, reactivates his soul restriction ability. In an instant, the leader is completely bound in chains. He tries to scream as the chains tighten around his neck. Confused, the long-haired man doesn't understand why his ability isn't working. Indu explains that with a significant level difference, he can nullify the enemy's power. Still struggling, the leader asks what level difference Indu is talking about, revealing that he's already level 7. Tightening the chains further, Indu tells him he's done well for a beginner. Assessing them all, Indu tries to figure out the conditions needed to acquire their soul fragments. The big man's condition is to satisfy his hunger, the skinny man's is to introduce him to his older sister, and the leader's is to experience genuine fear. With a menacing glare, Indu tells the leader that his condition is one he can fulfill right now. As he strangles the leader, the man begins begging for his life. Holding the dagger, Indu explains that leaving him alive would only put him at a disadvantage. The terrified man, in extreme fear, pleads to understand what he means. Indu coldly says he could sell parts of the leader's body, as there are always buyers in the market. Smirking, he adds that the interest on the 50,000 yen loan was quite steep. The skinny man shouts that the protagonist truly seems like the type to do such a thing. Offended, Indu retorts that there's no way a freelancer like him could have black market connections. He suggests they come up with another way to make money if they don't like his idea. In complete terror, the leader begs for his life, tears streaming down his face. A system notification confirms that the leader now fears him deeply, fulfilling the required conditions and granting Indu the leader's soul fragment. With that, Indu releases them from the chains. They collapse to the ground, gasping for air. Without missing a beat, the protagonist hands them several contracts, ordering them to sign. Outraged, they protest, furious that they'll have to give up 90% of their profits and obey his every command. With a bloodthirsty glare, Indu asks if they have any complaints. Terrified, they hastily reply that they have none. He declares that from this moment, the three of them are his subordinates and warns that if they ever think of betraying him, the operating table will await them. Unexpectedly, Yu demands they lead him to their actual leader. They're completely horrified, asking how he figured it out. He explains that the items they're using couldn't possibly belong to weaklings like them, clearly indicating someone stronger is behind them. He asks if he's correct. Kaki begins begging, claiming that if their boss finds out, he'll kill them. Placing his foot on the subordinate's head, Yu coldly asks if he'll betray his boss or have his organs sold off. Shaking, the skinny man mutters something incoherent before suddenly breaking into tears and running away, shouting that he wants neither option. The big guy is stunned. Yu points at the fleeing man, questioning if he really thinks escape is possible. The soul restriction chains reappear, capturing the man mid-run. His two companions are petrified by the display of dominance as their friend is suffocated. Trembling, they agree to lead him to their boss, but Yu also demands all their weapons and money first. The protagonist observes that security in this world is abysmal, sarcastically remarking that unaimed security was better. Smirking, he laughs, claiming that no one can hurt him now. In his status window, it's clear that Yu is operating on an entirely different level. As the sun sets, the scene shifts to a circus. Like any circus, there's a tightrope walker performing alongside rings of fire and other spectacles. Beneath the big top, a man is seen beating someone viciously. The victim collapses to the ground, bloodied. Inside a makeshift cell, others watch with dread, muttering that they'll be next. One prisoner expresses sorrow for the victim. A man with a bloodied face tells the beaten individual he failed the task and asks if he wants to apologize to the boss. Another captive shouts, pleading for the violence to stop, warning that the victim will die. Wearing a sadistic grin, the man retorts that death is deserved, claiming they're all nothing but burdens to the boss. Suddenly, someone holding a whip interjects, asking why they're discussing him. The sadistic man immediately stammers, addressing him as boss. The boss, his face painted like a clown, approaches and chastises his subordinate for being too harsh. Helping the bloodied man to his feet, the boss remarks that if bones were broken, recovery would take too long. He reprimands the sadist, emphasizing that, no matter how incompetent they may be, his subordinates shouldn't break their tools. Nervously sweating, the sadistic man grovels and apologizes profusely. Tears in his eyes, the beaten man begins thanking the boss, promising he'll do better next time. Before he can finish, the clown cracks his whip, striking the man's face with devastating force. The clown continues lashing him, stating that this method is preferable, it doesn't break bones but flays flesh instead. Still attacking him, the boss mocks that even animal welfare organizations wouldn't assist him if he stays this lazy. Suddenly, a voice announces that they've returned, catching the boss's attention with a sinister glare. He remarks that they're back too soon. The long-haired man explains they need to report in, as they're in no condition to continue the mission. The clown notices his hand and realizes the ring is missing. He becomes furious, staring at Key. The boss demands to know where the ring is, saying it's worth more than his life. The long-haired man bows, apologizing and explaining that they were robbed by a man who was practically a monster. Ignoring his explanation, the boss strikes him down, causing him to fall from the impact. Enraged, the boss says that even with such a small guild, he shouldn't be surrounded by such incompetent fools. Both of Kuki's companions admit that most left because of his abuse of power. The boss declares there's only one task left that Kuki can do and orders his other subordinate to lock the clown in place. Suddenly, a large white tiger's paw appears, moving toward the long-haired man. The tiger growls at him furiously. Stammering in fear, the long-haired man pleads with the boss, claiming he's been loyal from the start. The clown smiles and gives the order to let the tiger feast. The tiger opens its mouth, ready to strike Kuki, who stands frozen in fear. Out of nowhere, someone swings in from one of the circus apparatuses. It's the protagonist, who saves his new subordinate by kicking the tiger away with incredible strength. He sends the animal flying. The boss, concerned for his tiger, looks at it while shouting its name. The protagonist, smiling, apologizes but says he couldn't allow him to kill his source of income. The boss rushes to his animal, asking if it's alright and expressing concern over its fright. Desperate, Kuki asks why Ndu took so long to show up, but the swindler only complains that there wasn't much to loot. Unexpectedly, the boss attacks him from behind with his whip. However, to his shock, the protagonist cuts the whip with ease, even with his back turned. In the blink of an eye, the boss is left without his whip, which falls to the ground in pieces. Nervous and frightened, the clown asks who the protagonist is as his blade glows purple. Ndu responds that he's the new boss of the group. Locke, outraged, starts demanding where their gratitude for the boss is. The men ask why they should be grateful, explaining they only obeyed him out of fear. Now, they believe the protagonist is far scarier. Staring down Locke, the protagonist asks if he's hurt the men in the cages. He says that if they sign a contract, he'll protect them from this weakling. One of the men, who was just attacked, asks if the protagonist will take them out of this hell. With a malicious grin, the protagonist confirms. He announces that he'll only take 50% of everything they earn. His other subordinates, angered, complain about the high percentage, but he simply says it's because they tried to kill him. Trembling with rage, the clown demands to know if, aside from hurting his animal, the protagonist also plans to steal his subordinates. His eyes glow purple as he vows to kill all four of them. Ndu responds, saying they're in Japan and asks when such barbaric behavior became acceptable, pulling an ID from his inventory. The clown explains his authority by holding up a guild master ID and a certificate from the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. Surprised, the protagonist realizes he's a guild master. The clown elaborates that the Japanese government grants guild leaders the power to act above the law to conquer dungeons, noting that not even the police can interfere. Andre comments that in Japan, those with power face no consequences. Grinning, Yu asks if being a guild master would allow him to conduct shady business without repercussions. The clown sneers, calling him foolish, and grabs a gun, explaining that one must be at least rank B to become a guild master. Pointing the weapon at Yu, the clown declares that he'll kill him, claiming he doesn't need to know anything else. Firing his gun, the guild master vows to turn you into a sieve. However, you calmly raises his soul barrier, an ability requiring level 25 and type E magical soul fragments. As the bullets ricochet harmlessly off the barrier, the clown curses and reluctantly praises you, calling him clever. You counters, remarking that Russia used nuclear missiles during the ice test and still failed. He taunts the guild master, asking why no players use firearms if they're so effective. Panicking, the guild master shouts for you not to approach, but a powerful shock from the barrier causes him to drop the gun. The barrier presses forward, slowly crushing the clown against the wall, causing it to crack. The man spits blood as you laughs triumphantly. When the barrier dissipates, the guild master collapses to the ground, powerless. You mocks him, stating that abilities far surpass weapons and that Andre should never have thought toys like guns could defeat him. Watching their leader's defeat, the former subordinates murmur that even the boss was powerless against you. Smiling, you offers them a deal. If they agree to his terms, he'll let them take revenge. Desperate, they accept, agreeing to his contract as long as they can deal with their fallen leader. The guild master weakly asks how you, a man without a license, managed to do this, warning that the authorities won't stay quiet. You dismisses the threat, reminding him of his own words, power is everything. As he lays defeated, the clown hears footsteps. Looking up, he sees all of his former subordinates approaching. They begin beating their boss as you watches, calculating the profits he made from the ordeal. He muses that they'll bring him even more wealth in the future. Checking the system window, you concludes it's time to finish the test while the situation is still chaotic. He notes there's only a month left, calling it the perfect moment. At the headquarters of the Player Association, the rank certification exam is underway. You arrives to take the test, overhearing a conversation between three people behind him. One says that becoming a rank B player guarantees a high salary in the tens of millions of yen. Another warns not to get his hopes up, pointing out that only 1% of Japan's population reaches rank B, and just 9 individuals are rank A. The group continues their conversation while the protagonist listens silently. Endo notes that it has been 2 weeks since the game became reality. The government had offered a 100 million yen reward to anyone who could end the trial, but the results were disastrous. Now, registering with the Player Association is mandatory. Without it, participants can't claim any rewards. As Endo walks toward the association, he considers the significant money at stake and thinks about getting a share. However, he senses someone watching him from above. Searching for the observer, an object suddenly flies toward him. Effortlessly, he dodges the attack. Onlookers murmur in shock, noting that a traffic cone fell from the sky. It's Takwa, a loan shark, who taunts Endo, shouting that he won't escape his debt so easily. Endo dryly asks if the loan shark came to take the exam too, mocking him by saying that someone weak enough to be defeated by the novice fist ability should give up on being a player. Takwa retorts, claiming he's changed and now holds the strongest class, Spearman. Endo laughs, dismissing Spearman as a beginner's class for amateurs who don't understand the game. Takwa demands to know Endo's class, and with a sly grin, Endo responds that he's a novice. Takwa bursts out laughing, mocking him for essentially being classless. Internally, Endo admits his main class is indeed novice but decides not to mention his secondary class. Raising the traffic sign again, Takwa declares he'll get revenge and demonstrate the true power of a spearman. He unleashes a flurry of attacks, but Endo casually dodges them, closing the distance. Panicked, Takwa demands to know how Endo can move like that. Facing him directly, Endo explains he didn't want trouble before the exam but can't help it when problems find him. With a single motion, he flings Takwa into the air, causing panic among onlookers. As Takwa crashes to the ground, screaming, Endo brushes off the situation, calling it self-defense before continuing on his way. Inside the luxurious Player Association building, the receptionist informs Endo that the registration fee is 8,000 yen, which he finds unreasonably expensive. Later, as he sits, dejected about the loss of his money, a girl approaches him, smiling apologetically for the delay. She announces that the rank certification exam is about to begin. Endo is led to a massive black rock emitting a strong purple light. The assistant explains the exam, and Endo asks if he needs to touch the rock. As his hand nears it, several rays of light connect to him. Moving closer, a powerful blue light flares, and the moment his hand touches the rock, a massive explosion of light occurs, startling even the assistant. Rays of energy and an intense glow emanate from the stone as everyone looks on in shock. In another room, the assistant, still astonished, calls Endo's name and announces his result. He is equivalent to rank A. Handing him the classification document, she nervously explains that players can change their class and suggests options like Master Swordsman, Master Mage, or Archbishop. Endo declines, explaining that his desired class isn't available yet. Confused, the woman asks what class that is, but he refuses to share. She then informs him that class changes require a special item and offers the association's assistance, which he coldly declines. A bit uneasy, the assistant asks if his decision won't cause problems. Endo questions her concern, and she explains that despite his unmatched power for rank A, his lack of a class means he'll be downgraded to rank E. She notes that rank E comes with significant restrictions, such as being unable to form his own guild, which could be a disadvantage for him. Endo remarks that the government loves creating pointless rules while thinking to himself that all he needs to do is promote a subordinate to rank B. He recalls that only one class can clear this game, and he's not planning on changing that anytime soon. The protagonist then asks if even a rank E can claim the 100 million reward for clearing the test. She confirms, and Gon explains that his registration will need to be issued as rank E. Later, walking down the street, the protagonist notices people holding up posters, trying to recruit individuals who've just finished the test. Smiling, he observes the effort they're putting into it. Two girls approach, looking for rank D players and asking if he wants to join their guild. Yu informs them that he's rank E, and the girls begin to lament, understanding his rank. He notices that rank E players are treated poorly but convinces himself he doesn't care. Suddenly, his attention is drawn to a man in a suit walking through the crowd, surrounded by an orange aura. His eyes glow orange as he locks eyes with Endo. The man introduces himself and asks if his name is Ri, handing him a card with details for a guild called Genesis Wings. People nearby speculate if Genesis Wings is the strongest guild and wonder if this man is the Stinker. The protagonist asks what Stinker means, and the man awkwardly explains it's his nickname in the game. Realizing the man is famous, the protagonist wonders if befriending him could be profitable. He asks Shinji what he wants, but their conversation is interrupted by the loan shark, who asks if the Stinker is looking for him. Teiko, the loan shark, approaches and claims that despite being a rank B player, he won't be influenced by bad decisions. The protagonist wonders if this weakling is truly rank B and suspects he might have threatened the examiner. Shinji asks who the man is, and the loan shark angrily calls him a little girl. Teiko gets enraged, grabbing the man by his tie and threatening him, claiming he's strong. However, with one swift movement, the man easily twists Teiko's arm, forcing him to his knees in pain. A bit more seriously, Shinji says that with the world's end drawing near, they don't have time to waste on this. Teiko storms off angrily, telling Shinji not to cry and to try recruiting him later. The man apologizes to the protagonist for the disturbance, but Endo says it's fine since Teiko was also a nuisance to him. The protagonist asks what Shinji wants, assuming someone like him wouldn't have anything to say to a rank E. Shinji laughs, calling him humble, and says that the only reason Endo is rank E is because he refused to change classes. Laughing, the protagonist comments that the association is quite loose-lipped. Shinji, a bit awkward, says that with Japan's end approaching, they can afford to lower their guard. Shinji then offers the protagonist a deal, asking what he thinks about working with them. He offers the same amount they paid for information, handing Endo a check for 10 million yen. Shocked, Yu remarks that it's an amount he had some time ago, but internally he's desperate for the money. He hands the check back, saying he's not interested in joining any guild. Shinji observes that strong people really don't settle for less. The Stinker then makes another offer, asking if Yu isn't interested in the information they have. He claims his guild is supported by government agencies and other guilds worldwide. The protagonist asks if they could find out who the player was that completed Prophecy Online. Smiling, Shinji says it's impossible since no one has completed the game. Irritated, the protagonist declares he'll decline, and Shinji, afraid after seeing his reaction, backs off. He hands Endo a piece of paper, saying that if he changes his mind, he can contact him. As the man leaves, he wonders why he gave up so easily. He questions if he was worried about ruining his guild's reputation by pushing too hard, but he concludes it wasn't that. Shinji confesses that he was terrified, as if every part of his body told him not to cross paths with such a monster, almost making the Stinker soil his pants. The protagonist pats him on the shoulder and hands him a piece of paper, leaving the man even more perplexed. He tells him that if he ever needs help, he can call, and depending on the amount, he might accept. Nervously taking the paper, the man thanks him for his kindness, still unsure of what just happened. Shinji wonders, in his disoriented state, who the protagonist really is. Later, at the headquarters of Genesis Wings Guild, someone hurries down the hallway to the top floor. Feeder enters the guild master's office, formally announcing his return. The master suddenly turns around, revealing herself as a woman. She asks how his meeting with the newbie, deemed the strongest by the association, went. Still a bit nervous, Shinji admits that the protagonist is genuinely a monster. Trembling, he admits that the protagonist was the only player who made him feel fear during their conversation. With a terrifying look, the guild master asks who is stronger between her and the protagonist. Shinji hesitates, stammering. She says she'll take his silence as an answer while looking at the protagonist's file. Shinji, still nervous, apologizes, but she tells him not to, as his job is simply to relay all information without hiding anything. The guild master explains that among the 10 transcendent players, she is the lowest ranked and that it's not surprising there are people stronger than her. She goes on to explain that the 10 transcendent players are the best from the Prophecy Online test, those who receive a cash prize. In a world where the game has become a reality, the appearance of someone powerful disrupts the power hierarchy. She notes that since Shinji returned alone, it means the negotiation failed. He confirms that the protagonist isn't interested in the information they possess, let alone the 10 million yen offered. With her arms crossed, the guild master says that if the protagonist is indeed one of the 10 transcendent players, fame and wealth will come to him naturally. She observes that there's no way someone from the 10 transcendent players could remain a rookie voluntarily. However, she also mentions that there are hidden items with great power, but they come with side effects. She advises Shinji to continue assessing the protagonist with his own eyes, as if his assessments are correct, the protagonist will surely become the strongest in the world. The guild master adds that, in any case, the strongest person in the world could only be one of the 10 transcendent players whose identity remains unknown. Shinji nervously asks if she's referring to the first place. He informs her that even the United States is searching for data on the top 10 players, but the number 1 slot is corrupted. The guild master suggests that the United States might be hiding the number 1 player secretly in their country. Shinji says he believes the rumors, but after meeting the protagonist, he remembers their encounter and now thinks it's very likely that the protagonist is number 1. The guild master agrees, stating that if Shinji is saying this, it's likely true. She looks out the window and orders Shinji to inform all members that hostile actions against the protagonist are strictly prohibited. She compares him to a nuclear bomb, one whose explosion time is unknown, and must be handled with care. Shinji, still nervous, promises to do as instructed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in another large building, Endo says it's been a few weeks since they began searching for hideout locations for their source of income. As he looks out at the view, one of his subordinates calls out to him. They are positioning a TV and ask for his opinion. Kaki steps forward, presenting a suitcase full of money, saying he managed to collect the day's taxes. The protagonist praises him and asks how the attack group's preparations are going. Kaki reports that they're easily leveling up in the underground sewers and making 1 million yen a day. Excitedly, he informs the protagonist that even the new recruits are making 100,000 yen per day. The long-haired man says he never imagined making so much money, thanking the protagonist. The player reminds him that he promised to make them money, and as they profit, so does he. He explains that the taxes are essentially fees for the information. Kaki thinks to himself that paying 90% is a lot, but without the information, he wouldn't even make 10%. Looking at the protagonist, he realizes that this man has valuable knowledge. The long-haired man asks what they should do about the judgment, as there are only 10 days left, and the reward is already at 400 million yen. The protagonist replies that he will wait a little longer. Suddenly, Endo's attention is caught by the TV, which is broadcasting something important. It shows the location of the test and states that if it's not completed in 10 days, Japan will be destroyed. Another presenter adds that, like before, the situation seems hopeless, but his colleague shares new information. The Japanese government has announced they will pay 1 billion yen to whoever completes the test. The player, observing the announcement, comments that if they delay too long, foreign guilds might try to intervene. Picking up a piece of clothing, he says that now is the best moment to act, stressing that he will go out for a bit. The long-haired man asks if he's going alone, and Yu confirms, saying that he can't put his source of income at risk. Everyone is fascinated by him, but then his 171 personality takes over, and he says, "It's 1 billion yen, and for that, I'll take everything." Kaki snaps back to reality, realizing it's all about the money. It's already night when the protagonist arrives at the test location, where many people are gathered in front of the gate. Shinji notices his presence, and as always, the player is calm, as if he were simply going to a market. Happy, Feeder asks if you really came, and the protagonist replies that he has no intention of cooperating. However, Shinji says it's a shame, as he wanted to strike a profitable deal with him. He offers 100 million yen for you to transport some items. This catches the protagonist's full attention. Shinji leads him to a space filled with hundreds of backpacks. He asks you to take one of the backpacks to his members inside the test. Curious, Yu asks what's inside them that makes them worth 100 million yen. Shinji responds that they contain provisions. Opening one of the backpacks, Yu sees that it's full of supplies and asks what this is, with Shinji explaining that these are the guild master's favorites. Shinji goes on to say that they're in the deepest layer of the test, and due to that, they're running low on provisions. With a smile, the protagonist asks what the issue is, as with that amount, many people would accept the task. Embarrassed, Shinji admits that they're in a difficult situation. He reveals that he had asked 39 groups to help, but all of them were annihilated. The player begins to speak, saying the first 4 layers should only be formalities, and wonders if it's different from the game. Still nervous, Shinji concludes that you must know something. Shinji clarifies that as far as they know, the test is the same as the game, but most people can't reach the 5th layer. Everyone who makes it to the 5th layer is waiting for supplies. He adds that only you and his guild master are the ones who could call the 4th layer a formality. While picking up the backpack, the protagonist asks if they are really that sure about their manpower situation. Either way, he's still making money. Looking at Feeder, he asks if he'll get a reward if he delivers it quickly. As he grabs his phone, Shinji says he will talk to his superiors. Watching the man talk on his phone, Yu wonders how much money he could make with them. Shinji informs him that if the delivery is made within a day, they'll add an additional 50 million yen. Suddenly, Shinji heard a noise. It was the protagonist. Turning quickly, he mentioned that he would be there in an hour. Inside the test's 3rd layer, a group of people were battling a giant insect. The man, struggling against the monster's attacks while pinned to the ground, urged the woman to run, even if it meant doing so alone. She cried out to him, begging him to come with her. The man smiled, turned to thank her, and told her to go. She screamed his name, reaching for him, but unexpectedly, the protagonist sliced through the insect, telling it they were in his way. The man collapsed in shock, unable to comprehend how he was still alive as the monster's body crumbled around him. His wife thanked the protagonist, but in a blink of an eye, he was already gone, leaving them behind, still puzzled about what had just occurred. The protagonist sped through the cave at an insane pace, and they were left wondering if he was already gone. He finally reached the 5th layer, halting his sprint. Indu realized it hadn't even been an hour and concluded that the 150 million yen would certainly be worth it. But suddenly, something caught his attention. A man approached and asked if he was Indu. The protagonist placed the backpack down and asked if the man was from Genesis Wings, to which the man confirmed. He explained he had delivered the provisions Shinji had requested and that the payment had already been transferred to his account. Opening his bank app, Indu saw that 150 million yen had indeed been deposited. Satisfied, he thanked the man for the deal. As various players appeared, their leader informed them they had been waiting for food for a long time. They started to divide the provisions, relieved they were finally saved. One player mentioned informing the line. The protagonist noted that it seemed dreadful, and the leader agreed, saying they had already lost many members. Suddenly, panic spread as people began running, shouting that they would be caught. As they neared the camp, they thought they were safe, but then a loud noise echoed through the cave, causing everyone pain. They turned to see a large cloud of smoke rising, and to their shock, a massive swarm of giant insects was charging toward them. The protagonist prepared to attack when, out of nowhere, a huge flame passed by him, incinerating all the insects. The guild master appeared, burning the creatures and stopping to sheath her sword, her blade still surrounded by flames. The insect bodies fell to the ground, charred beyond recognition. You recognized that she had used a high-level secret skill, elemental sword, Hellfire. The guild master walked up to him, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. She thanked you for delivering the provisions and introduced herself as the guild master.
Yamaga Sakino suggested that Ri work hand in hand from now on. Ri began to emit a strong aura, but when Sakino began to approach him, he too felt a strong aura emanating from her. Sakino looked him straight in the eyes, and her aura was literally staggering in its power. As the girl stepped closer to Ri, she stumbled and almost fell. Sakino laughed and immediately apologized, explaining that she hadn't eaten anything in a long time, so her legs weren't holding her up at all. Ri said that he had heard they were out of supplies, but this was the first time he had heard they were starving. At this time, behind his back, a real canned food fight was going on among the crew. Ri and Sakino decided to continue their conversation in the tent. The guy asked her if she was the strongest on her squad. Sakino replied that she was. Sakino was finally able to enjoy her favorite chocolates and revealed that although she was the last in strength, she was a member of the 10 Excellent Ones. Ri was enjoying his favorite tea, and he was surprised by such a marvelous name, 10 Excellent. He asked what it was. Sakino got angry jumped up from her chair and slammed her palms on the table, shouting that the name wasn't strange and that it was the name of the top 10 players who were in the top 10 with the time of the game, and that was the name the government had given them. Ri remained calm and asked how the government had managed to calculate their strength. Sakino said that the data on the strongest players was obtained by U.S. Special Services. They still haven't been able to find a player who is first in the rankings. The girl also said that a dozen great players were sponsored by the government and asked if they weren't interested in him. The words about sponsorship interested Ri, and he asked how much the government was paying them. Sakino replied that it usually depends on the country the player lives in. In Japan, it is around 1 million, and that's when things started to make sense to Ri. Now he understood where that first million had come from. In his head, he was very angry because people like this caused him to become a gambler, eventually almost losing his life. Ri realized that if he was still number one, it was worth keeping it quiet since if anyone found out, there would be no avoiding trouble. That's why he told Sakino that 1 million is some kind of pittance, since even the reward for passing the test of the land is much higher. The girl replied that the amount may not be significant, but the biggest money is being made by those who know anything about playing this game. And that's because no one's ever been able to take down the local boss. Ri then asked that even if she was one of the top 10 players, Sakino couldn't beat him. The girl replied that no matter how strong she was still an ordinary person. Sakino explained that if she had the level and equipment of her in-game avatar, maybe she could do well, but in the current situation, it was unlikely that she would be able to prevail. Ri stood up and said that he had accomplished the mission, and if they needed help, they could go to him, and depending on their fee, they could make a deal. The guy headed for the exit, pondering that now it was time to kick the ass of the boss living on this level, since 1 billion wouldn't earn itself. Sakino jumped up and started asking Ri to stop. She shouted loudly and asked that they defeat the local boss together. The crew heard this, and they didn't like it. They started shouting that they could do it without Ri, and they didn't want to mess with that weirdo. Sakino turned to them and reminded them in a gruff tone that any aggressive actions towards Ri would be severely punished. The team members quieted down, and the girl said that she understood their displeasure. However, she didn't want to lose anyone else. All of the team members immediately had flashbacks of fighting the boss. Sakino tried to overpower him with hellfire. However, the defenses had already been breached, and her team members were unable to fight. The girl ordered everyone to retreat, and those who could still move tried to help the wounded. Then one of the team members told her that if they retreated, she might get hurt, but Sakino gave the retreat command to avoid more casualties. One of the warriors held back the boss's attack and told Sakino to leave while he held back the monster. The girl didn't want to leave and told him to go with everyone else. The warrior disobeyed, and the monster destroyed him before Sakino's eyes. She watched this and couldn't even move from her seat. Now Sakino treasures even the life of one person on her team. She wants to keep everyone. The girl told her team that she believes that together with Ri, they can avoid big losses. She began shouting to her warriors that mopping up the land test and restoring the balance of power in Japan was all they could do to honor their fallen comrades. Sakino was approached by Ri and told that it was a heartwarming speech, and he was touched, but she could have done without being so crucified. He turned around and said with a smile that he himself is able to overpower the boss alone. Ri walked out of the tent, and Sakino thought, what an ego this guy has. But what if he's number one? She wondered if they were wrong about him, and how Ri was going to fight alone. So Sakino ran to catch up with Ri and said that Ri had talked about her being able to go to him for help. She shouted after him that she was ready to hire him as part of a group to conquer the boss. Ri immediately stopped and thought he could finally smell money. He turned around and replied that he felt like she needed more than just defeating her boss, but something else as well. Sakino said that she realized that they were asking for something exorbitant, so they were willing to pay compensation for the inconvenience. The words about compensation made Ri's eyes shine. He said that 10 million from each member of the group would be great, and on top of that, Ri set conditions. 1. They pay the advance. 2. They don't tell anyone what they saw in that fight. The team was furious at the demands. Ri said that they wanted everyone to survive and defeat the boss, so that was the price. Sakino smiled and replied that she agreed. The team members started shouting, trying to stop her. The angry girl turned to the team and ordered everyone to listen to her. She told everyone to listen to Ri and help him win. Meanwhile, Ri wondered how much money this guild had, since it had so easily agreed to 10 million per person. A while later, they all set off together and stopped when they saw something terrible. A huge number of flying monsters were moving toward them. The guild members began to panic. Ri assumed an attack pose and told Sakino that he could slaughter all those things for their money. However, the girl smiled and replied that she could handle them herself. Sakino finished her chocolate bar and started laughing evilly. She used the all-consuming fire technique again. The monsters were literally being burned alive. Ri watched and thought it was pretty good. The team was proud of their leader, put down her sword, and told Ri that they could now safely continue on their way. Ri looked at her and couldn't believe that this girl had been eating chocolates 10 minutes ago. He held out his phone and told her the advance had been deposited into his account, and now he's ready to pass Japan's first test with them and end this dungeon once and for all. A little while later, Ri stood quietly while the team members and Sakino fought the monsters. During this battle, one of the team members asked the head if she was even sure about this guy. After all, considering how much she paid him, they expected more from his fighting skills. He just uses the usual attacks, that's all. Sakino smiled and replied that wasn't exactly true. She told the man to look at the monsters Ri had killed. There were no visible injuries on them. However, they were definitely lying dead. Sakino argued that this was what proved his skill. She noticed that Ri didn't even try to dodge, and his punches weren't exactly original. The only thing that was interesting to her was what Ri would show in the room of the boss himself. The team arrived at the 5th level before the entrance to the boss room. Ri noticed how the team members shuddered at the mere sight of this entrance. They clearly had bad memories of this place. Sakino stepped forward and encouraged her warriors, saying that they must avenge their fallen comrades. She told them to use the most powerful blows they possessed. As soon as the door opened, Sakino raised her sword up and ordered the team to advance. They rushed in with a shout. The huge spider was in the middle of the room, surrounded by its web. The team approached him closely, Ri keeping to the side. The monster opened its eyes, and the system reported that the boss of the 5th level of the Earth test, the sinier spider, had appeared. Sakino immediately used Hellfire to incinerate the monster. The rest of the team used Fire Fist and Phoenix Fury. Because of so many fire blows, an explosion occurred, engulfing the monster in flames. The team looked at this explosion and began to rejoice that they were able to defeat the monster. However, Ri said that wasn't true. The monster was still alive. In that very second, the spider struck so hard, forming a flash and throwing all the team members in different directions. The monster's web shone with a bright blue color, and having received so many attacks, there wasn't a single scratch on it. Sakino didn't understand how this was possible. She was sure that insect-like monsters were weak to fire damage. Ri replied that she was right, but the power of their blows was so small that they were incapable of damaging him. At that moment, the spider started shooting a huge amount of web directly at Sakino. The girl managed to dodge the attack. She landed on one knee and warned her team to beware of the web, for if they got caught in its web, it would be very difficult to get out. Ri was standing behind the backs of the 2 guild members at this time and noticed the cobwebs flying in their direction. He immediately grabbed them and flew off with them, dodging the monster's attack. Ri then dragged them away from the spider and threw them on the ground. The boy smiled and apologized to Ri for having to cover them. Ri looked at him and replied that he shouldn't apologize because if they died, his reward would decrease. That's why he was saving their asses. Ri also added that they can keep getting screwed over, and then for each such prank, they will have to pay another 1 million on top for each one. Ri realized that he could keep dragging out the fight, making another million each on their stupidity, but their guild was tied directly to the government, and if he continued to act like this, he could get himself into trouble in the future. Ri stood at the top and decided to apply the Eye of the Soul. He glanced at Sakino, and the condition of receiving her soul fragment surprised him. The condition was to make the bearer experience the greatest surprise of his life. Ri decided it was worth the risk. He immediately took his dagger in his hand and flew straight at the spider. With one strike of his dagger, Ri was able to cut off one leg of the monster. The spider immediately turned its attention to him and directed its attacks at Ri. The monster swung its huge paw and was about to strike. The spider released so much webbing that there was a light explosion. Sakino covered her face with her hand due to the large amount of dust, along with the cobwebs, and started screaming and calling for Ri. The girl was very frightened and thought that everything was over and their last hope was dead. Sakino heard Ri turn to the spider and ask him if he really tried to kill it with such force. The girl got very excited. Ri managed to stop the attack of the huge spider with just one hand. The system notified that he was using the spirit power skill. The required item to activate the skill was any rank E-Soul fragment. The team members couldn't believe their eyes that Ri had survived and was blocking the boss's one-handed attack. Ri grabbed the monster by its paw and began spinning it around at breakneck speed. Then, with an incredible force, he threw the monster back a few meters. The guy immediately approached the monster, and after examining it, said that the weak point of the spider was its abdomen. Ri stabbed his dagger with great force and released a strong energy that flowed through the monster's entire body. The team members began to cheer and shout that Ri had defeated the monster. However, the guy asked why they thought that, since the fight was just beginning. Suddenly, at the same moment, a huge amount of red liquid began to come out of the spider's wound. The guild members assumed battle stances and began to shout that this monster had changed its appearance. The spider's wounds healed, its paws turned red, and the monster's aura became much stronger and brighter. The guild members watched the spider rise to its feet. They couldn't understand why it didn't die. After all, Ri had hit it on its weak spot. The spider rose from the ground, its eyes glowing a bright red color, and it was now several times larger. Ri explained to the entire team that the senior spider has 2 stages, and in the second one, it becomes much stronger and more ferocious. One of the team members got angry and started asking why Ri hadn't warned them about it sooner. Ri stretched his arm forward and began to use the soul thread skill, saying that they wouldn't be able to do anything with this information anyway. The guy started to fly toward the monster, and long golden threads stretched behind him. Ri began to wrap thread around the spider from all sides and prepared his dagger in one hand. He rose above the spider and pulled the threads tighter. The system alerted that the soul-sizzling skill could be activated. The required level is 40. Sakino saw what was happening and immediately ordered her team to run for cover, as it was dangerous to stay there. Ri raised his hand up and swung his dagger, telling everything around him to blaze with sizzling fire. Flames engulfed the spider boss, and he began to squeak in pain, the fire burning him alive from the inside out. Sakino turned around and couldn't believe he had succeeded. She realized that Ri's fire was much stronger than hers. Ri calmly stood still and looked at the monster with a serious expression. The happy guild members couldn't be happier that the battle was over and they were all still alive. They noticed a huge block of diamonds. They knew that valuable loot fell out of monsters, but they didn't expect a stone of this size to fall out of the boss. Ri immediately ordered them to stay away from the diamond. The guild members shouted that he was making fun of them, having already taken a lot of money from them, and now he wanted to take the loot for himself. Ray called them idiots, and then Sakino noticed that there were paws sticking out of this gem and moving. Ri explained to them that the boss of the Earth test had turned from an obsidian spider to a vermilion spider, and this was his perfect form. The crew members almost went crazy. They couldn't believe that the monster was still alive. Ri ordered them to stop talking and prepare for battle. The monster used a magic attack and lifted all the people into the air, throwing them in different directions. Sakino tried to keep her balance and warned her team that this monster's attacks on the area had become much faster and more powerful. Ray ran up to her and told her not to get distracted, but to take the squad and get them out of there if they wanted to survive. Sue asked him what he was going to do. Ray replied that it was obvious. He had decided to deal with the monster himself. The monster attacked relentlessly, but Ray dodged each one with incredible speed. He told the girl that in this phase, the boss attacks indiscriminately and won't rest until all the players are killed. And while they have the chance, they should run. Since it's one thing to dodge his attacks, it's quite another to overpower him. Ray approached the monster's paw and stabbed with his dagger, trying to cut off the paw. However, there wasn't a scratch on his paw. Ray had assumed that even the infernal dagger was incapable of injuring him, so he decided to hit it at its weakest point. Ray rose above the monster and flew toward it with great speed. The system reported that the Soul Reserve had been activated. The guild members watched this and couldn't understand what he was doing, and if he didn't value his life. Ray stopped above the monster and began to bait it with his aura, waiting for that very moment. The monster pierced him with its tentacle, blood splattering in all directions. Ray winced in pain. The guild members were shocked at what they saw. Sakino got scared and started screaming Ray's name. Ray laughed loudly and shouted that he had caught that monster at last. The spider darted its eyes around in horror and fear, realizing what was about to happen. Ray grabbed his dagger and used the soul-chopping skill. He inflicted thousands of cuts to the monster with just one strike. The spider's body shattered into pieces and scattered in different directions. Ray also began to fall to the ground with a huge rumble. The stone pieces and Ray's body fell to the ground. An exhausted Ray lay on the ground and thought about the fact that he knew it was going to hurt like hell, but if they didn't heal him, he was definitely going to die. The system alerted that there were 3 seconds left to recover, and if Ray didn't recover his health within that time, his soul protection would be removed and he would die. The guild members gathered around Ray and began to apply higher healing. Ray woke up and told Sakino that thanks to her support, he didn't have to use his skills to recover. The guy probed his wound and said that their treatment was certainly excellent. An angry Toino asked him if he had planned this all along. Ray looked her in the eye, smiled, and said that they were all playing a game together, after all, and it's not like a player can die so easily from a normal boss attack. Ray continued to smile stupidly. Sakino got angry at such irresponsibility. She started yelling that they were in reality, and it wasn't just a game. Ray replied that he understood, but that the same strategy worked in the game anyway, so it would work in reality. Sakino got even more angry. She almost lost her mind, not understanding at all what this crazy guy was doing. And at that moment, the system alerted that Ray had received a soul fragment of a rank D swordsman. The condition was to make the bearer experience the greatest surprise of his life. Ray took the fragment and thought he was lucky as it wasn't a surprise, but rather it put the girl through a shock. The system started to notify that the land test was successfully passed, and it was necessary to specify the name of the participants who passed this test. There are 5 minutes left until the dungeon disappears. The guild members began to jump with happiness that they were able to defeat the boss. Thanks to Ray interrupted them and said that before the dungeon disappeared, a decision had to be made on who to enter in the field of participants. He also admitted that although he wanted to take the entire award for himself, he suggested that they take it and then transfer it to his account afterward. Sakino was greatly surprised and asked why it was Ray who needed them to specifically transfer the reward to him. Then Ray said to them to just imagine how the news would explode with the news that a test that no one could pass was able to be overcome by an unknown player. It's easier to say that a famous guild handled the challenge. Then the guild will get glory and honor, and the rewards for the next trials will be hung up as well. Ray realized that if everyone found out he was involved, he wouldn't be able to make money so easily anymore. Sue asked him if he was just worried about money, and as the head of the guild, she can't refuse something like that, but as a human being, she feels like she's appropriating someone else's credit. Ray replied that she wasn't appropriating anything for herself, and she could consider hiring him to subdue the boss for 1 billion. Sakino agreed, and they agreed that they would announce that it was the Wings of Creation Guild that had passed the test. The system alerted that the record of the participants had been successfully saved. Ray could only hope that no one in the room would reveal his involvement in the test. After all, it's comparable to accusing your own guild of stealing laurels from a poor newbie. The ground test was successfully passed. However, a short time later, a media helicopter flew over the burning forest. The girl correspondent reported through the device that the earthquake had been going on since the morning, and the epicenter was identified underground. The atmosphere was heated. The girl reported that the dungeon was being destroyed, and very soon the players would be teleported to the surface. At this time, rocks were falling on the players in the dungeon. They tried to be extremely careful as everything around them collapsed. A magic circle appeared above them, attracting all the players like a magnet, pulling them to the surface. The system notified that the test had passed, and everyone was being teleported. All the guys were extremely relieved and happy to be heading towards the circle to get out of the dungeon sooner. Finally, the players got outside. They started jumping with happiness and rejoicing in the sunlight. They were able to breathe in the fresh air. Ri also breathed a sigh of relief, and at that moment, a huge monument appeared from the dungeon. Sakino took one look at that and said happily that they really were able to pull off such a difficult task. On this huge monument was an engraving that the test of the land had been passed by a group of heroes from the Wings of Creation Guild. The reporters and correspondents started running towards the guild like mad. It was a big sensation that the test had been passed. They couldn't wait to talk to these heroes. Journalists surrounded the guild members on all sides and shouted that this was the very group that had participated in the conquest. Sakino looked at what was going on and said that journalists don't even sleep. After that, she turned around and asked Ri if he was sure about their arrangement. However, Ri was no longer there, and no one had seen where he had disappeared to. One of the team members handed the girl a note and said that Ri had passed this on for her. Sakino read the note, which said that if they had any problems or money on hand, they could contact Ri, and he would solve any issue. At that time, journalists kept her busy with their questions. They wondered if Japan was safe now, who struck the final blow, and who managed to defeat the boss. One of the guys started to get aggressive and yelled for the reporters to get off their backs. However, Zeno asked him to calm down and told him that she would handle it. Sakino stepped forward and made an announcement to the citizens of Japan. She proudly announced the happy news that they, the members of the Wings of Creation Guild, were able to pass the test of the land. Sakino continued her speech and said that this merit did not belong to their guild alone. Namely, that conquering the dungeon was only possible through the combined effort of all the players. Cookie pulled up and told Ri that his car was ready. Ri smiled and replied that they were right on time. Sakino continued her speech, saying that she takes this opportunity to thank all those players who weren't afraid of the dungeon and risked their lives. The reporters were very moved by such a speech. They admired Sakino's modesty and said that this was how the head of the Wings of Creation Guild was. Ri, meanwhile, was riding in the car and thinking about the fact that Sakino got what she wanted, and he didn't care about popularity. Ri's main concern was that the money would end up in his hands. Too much attention would cause more trouble than good. Ri's insidious thoughts were that Sakino was the perfect candidate for his face, someone he could use to cover himself when necessary. After his musings, Ri said he was hungry and asked Cookie to stop somewhere. Meanwhile, breaking news was being broadcast on all channels. It was reported that Japan was no longer in danger of annihilation since the Earth test had been successfully passed by the members of the Wings of Creation Guild, and Japan was the second country after the US that managed to pass the test and keep the country together. A short while later, Ri, sitting in his office, received a notification of a 1 billion yen transfer. Ri's team members heard about the transfer of such a huge amount of money. However, they realized that they should definitely not count on this money. They were going through and masking coins, and one of the guys asked what they were even doing and why they were doing all this. Another of the team shut him up and told him not to ask stupid questions because if Ri said it, it had to be so. Ri called out to the girl, Rumi, and asked her how his guild's gold farm registration was going. Rumi approached and reported that the registration was successfully completed. However, she hesitantly asked why Ri had made the decision to have her as the head of the guild. Ri smiled and replied that the thing was that only players with rank B or higher could create their own guild, and he's rank E, so that function is not available to him. Rumi became agitated and said that there are still people better suited for the role. Ri looked her in the eye and told her that he had made that choice in her favor because she was the right person for the position. All the members of the Gold Farm Guild were able to raise their ranks to B and even higher. Each member of the guild has their own pros and cons. Although Rumi's earnings are not good, her pluses are that she is very diligent and friendly, and so Ri decided that she was the perfect guild leader at this time. Cookie came over and said that they were already being discussed all over the internet. A bunch of articles had been written about the fact that there is a new guild gold farm where all members with rank B and above, as well as interviews with the head of the guild. Ree chuckled and said that it was a good thing he had assigned himself the position of head of the office. Cookie wondered why Ree needed a guild since he could make a lot of money on his own. Ree replied that the main goal is to get as many orders for information as possible because the world is not only shaken by catastrophes like trials that affect the whole country. Some trials are more localized, affecting only a certain town or village, and according to Ree, only the guild can receive orders to complete such trials. Rumi came over and announced that they had made a list of all the easier trials with worthy rewards. Ree handed her the letter and told her that they would deal with the ordeal first. Rumi looked at it, and her eyes became like balloons. It said the trial was in a European-style mansion with a reward of 5 million yen. She said that, given the complexity, they could find orders where they would be paid a lot more. Cookie was surprised as Rumi had previously been willing to take any job, but now she was starting to care about money. However, Rumi said that if Ree had noticed the ordeal, it meant that the mansion could hold something else besides money. Ree replied that it was. Ree looked the girl straight in the eyes, and his aura became visible. He told her that this was an opportunity they shouldn't miss. Ree was driving in his car when suddenly he received a call from Rumi. Rumi reported that the set assignment was intercepted by their guild, and they managed to negotiate a reward of 5 million yen. Ree replied that this was great news and that he would be on site in 30 minutes. Suddenly, the other phone on the car seat started ringing, and that got Ree's attention. Ree answered the call. It was Yugi. He reported that he had arrived at the indicated position and strange people had entered the house. Ree asked how many people were there and if they had discovered Yugi. The guy answered that there were 5 of them, and they hadn't noticed him. Ree then said he'd handle the rest himself and told the guy to get out of there. Yugi was listed in Ree's phone as Golden Hamster number 2. Ending the conversation, Ree wondered what the other players had forgotten there. Since the request had been intercepted by his guild, he decided to use an illusionary mask to avoid showing his face unnecessarily. The system alerted that to create the item illusionary mask, materials were needed. Ree remembered that he had gotten the soul fragment of a rank D swordsman from Takino. After all, the system immediately reported that the probability of success in creating an illusionary mask using a rank D swordsman soul fragment was 0.23%. Rei then asked, what if the item was created manually? The system replied that the probability of success in such a case was unknown, and if Rei failed while creating the item, he would suffer physical or mental consequences. The system asked if Rei was ready to create the item manually, and of course he said yes. At the same second, the system announced that the transition to the Soul Forge had begun and also that Rei needed to harmonize his soul with the subject. The likelihood of success depended on how he handled this task, and since the base success rate was below 1%, the difficulty would be increased. The time limit was 60 minutes. Rei immediately got to work. He was shifting and connecting the pieces like puzzles, and he did it with incredible speed. The system reported that time was up, and the soul was in perfect harmony. The probability of success was 100%. The transition to the real world was performed. The illusionary mask was made thanks to the skill of the Soul Smith subclass. Rei was perfectly happy with the mask and told him to stop the car, as it was time for him to get out. He got out of the car, put on the mask, and now people would see him as a different person. Rei walked up to the very huge mansion they had been contracted for. He went inside and saw a pile of corpses. They had been set on fire, and the smell of burning still hung in the air. Rei walked past them and down the stairs, thinking that it looked like he was already expected. As he descended to the lowest point, he noticed that the hidden door was open. Rei realized that they were looking for a hidden test. Depending on the complexity, trials are divided into large-scale and small-scale trials. Large-scale ones involve an entire state, while small-scale ones involve small communities like towns and villages. Well, it is logical to assume that small-scale tests are not so complicated. Hence, you can't raise a lot of money on them. But even among them, there are exceptions, hidden trials. They arise only in small-scale trials in secluded corners. Their level of difficulty is much higher than that of small-scale tests and usually has nothing to do with the main test. The best part of these challenges is that you can get rare items. In other words, these challenges can only be found by those who have information about the game. Meanwhile, Ri found another staircase and began to descend even lower. Here, he met a team of people dressed in black clothing, and one of them took off his hood and asked if Ray was a representative from the Gold Farm Guild. Ray was surprised and replied that he didn't know what the gold farm was. Then the man apologized and said that he was mistaken, and afterward told Ri that he could see that he was capable of passing this hidden test. Ri gave him a sullen look and said that he had no intention of undergoing the hidden test for their sake. The man smiled and replied that Ri had misunderstood and that it wasn't necessary at all. Then Ri did not understand anything at all. The man showed him the box and said that the test had already been passed, asking if Ri had come for the evolutionary box. Ri wondered if they had really passed the test and wondered if he really needed the box. At that very second, the man threw the box right into Ray's hands and said that as a token of their appreciation, they were giving it to him. However, in return, they asked him to fulfill their request. Ri asked what exactly they were asking for. The man smiled and replied that Ri needed to keep other people from going small scale, and it didn't matter how he did it. He also said that if Ri was an experienced player, he should definitely know how to thwart others. Ri wondered why these people would want to prevent him from passing the test. Suddenly, he said he realized who they were. Ri asked, "Are they really the Dark Guild and want to set up the same thing that happened to Argentina 2 weeks ago?" One of the cities in Argentina, specifically Mendoza, was completely destroyed because no one could pass a simple test. But the whole problem happened a week ago. Shares of companies that were based in Mendoza underwent massive short selling across the board. It was as if someone knew in advance that Mendoza would be wiped off the face of the earth for good. Ri told the man that there was talk that the Dark Guild was to blame. He asked if they'd had enough of Argentina, and now they were going after Japan. Then the man told Ri that he could continue to fantasize about the reasons for their proposal, but asked him to answer whether Ri agreed or not. Ri looked him in the eye and replied that he was declining, no matter how tempting their offer sounded. And if he had to choose which one of them would destroy the city, it would be far more profitable for Ri to do it himself than to serve someone else. Then the man replied that it was a great pity and held out his hand, demanding the box back. Also, Ri would have to pay a small percentage for the time he held that box in his hands. Ri asked what other percentage, and then the man looked at him angrily and replied that the interest was in the form of his life. He pulled a syringe of unknown liquid from his pocket and told Ri that he had only 2 choices: either cooperate obediently or die. Ri immediately drew his sword and asked if they really thought they could overpower him. The man replied that in a normal situation, they would hardly have succeeded, but they had somehow managed to pass the secret test. He stuck a syringe in his neck, and the rest of his team did the same. He said that Ri would feel their power on him, and that player skills were useless in front of the incredible, powerful force of the Dark Guild. As soon as the players injected syringes into their necks, their auras turned dark purple, their eyes shining with a bright light. Ri watched their transformation from the sidelines and assumed they were doping. Ri knew that doping affected physical performance, but outwardly, they remained the same. However, he didn't understand why they were standing still. Then Ri looked at the box and realized what was wrong. He smiled and decided to play along. Ri then shook the box a few times, and the team leader immediately pulled out a remote and pressed a button. The box exploded. The members of the Dark Guild immediately started laughing loudly and said that Ri was a real idiot if he fell for such a simple trick, and in general, all players were like that. They believed that due to game mechanics, they became overpowered but remained too naive. The ringleader moved closer to the explosion and kept talking. All he had to do was divert attention to a possible threat and blow up the box. He even felt sorry for Ri. However, he immediately dismissed those thoughts and said that they didn't need such useless ones anyway. At this time, the smoke from the explosion had already cleared, and he noticed that Ri's body was gone, and the box was lying on the floor. No one could understand what had happened or where Ri had gone. At the same moment, Ray began to massacre the team members. He used destructive fire and began to burn them alive. The leader noticed that Ri was using an illusionary mask. After dealing with everyone, Ri approached the ringleader, taking off his mask, and said he felt sorry for his friends. After saying those words, he used the soul-capturing skill, and the chain shackled the ringleader in the same second, preventing him from moving. The ringleader kept yelling that it was impossible and asked how Ray managed to survive such an explosion. Ray smiled and replied that he was well aware of the value of the box and certainly didn't believe they had given it away out of the goodness of their hearts. He went to the box, picked it up, and said that it was clear from the beginning that it was booby-trapped, tormenting himself in chains. The ringleader asked why Ray had picked it up then if he knew it was booby-trapped. Ray laughed and said that they had underestimated the high-level players, and for them, the blast from such a small bomb was like a breeze in the face. Ray started calling Rumi. He told the leader that he would take the money from his wallet for the ruined clothes. The ringleader became frightened and started yelling that it was wrong for Ri to call the police. Ri smiled and replied that he was making the call on a much more important matter. Rumi answered the phone and cheerfully asked if Ri had already handled the test. Ri told her to look at the regions in Japan that were buying up shares with more fervor. After all, it was possible that the Dark Guild was doing the same thing to their country as they were doing to Argentina. Rumi immediately set to work, and Ri said that they must not let the tragedy repeat itself. The ringleader at this time started laughing loudly and told Ri that he was a straight-up hero of justice. Ri smiled and replied that he was talking nonsense. After all, the Dark Guild was deliberately collapsing the sales of local company stocks by selling them cheaply. And if Ray's people buy them out and he passes the test, how much money will Ri get? As if out of thin air? The ringleader got angry and asked if Ri was thinking of going to war against the Dark Guild. Ri replied that if there was a lot of money at stake, he would be more than happy to. Well, or they could cooperate with them. The ringleader got even more angry and asked what kind of idiot would cooperate with him. Ray called Rumi and asked if the re-education course was ready. Rumi clarified, the same one that would require a character with re-education. Ray said that was it. Then Rumi said that everything was ready, but they hadn't done any experiments yet and didn't know how effective such methods would be. Ray smiled and said that he would be delivering the lab rats to them soon, so preparations must be made. Ri opened the box, and the system reported that thanks to the evolution box item, the F-rank Mage Soul Fragment had turned into an E-rank Mage Soul Fragment. Sometime later, Ri, using an illusionary mask, arrived at the Museum of Modern Art. He called Rumi and asked if she was sure that was the purpose of the Dark Guild. Rumi replied that it was accurate information since the ringleader and the rest of the Dark Guild members had confessed to it. Rumi said that they unfortunately didn't know how many enemies would be in the area, and maybe he shouldn't have gone alone. Ray replied that he would figure it out. Ri went inside and ordered that Rumi continue to monitor the stock and let him know in case of anything. A crowd of people had gathered outside the museum, and in the very center, Ri spotted a guy named Takashi. He was putting an ad on the internet saying he was looking for a group to conquer. No rewards implied. They had to protect the city together. Takashi shouted that if anyone was interested in participating in the trial, they were free to join. He is the leader of an association for the protection of humanity. Ri noticed that there were quite a few people gathered, over 100 for sure. Takashi continued to speak his moving speech. It was hard for him to convey his feelings of admiration and pride at how many people had come to defend the city. He thanked each and every one of them. Ri was among the crowd and couldn't believe that so many people had gone to such an ordeal without reward. He assumed that a spy could easily have been in the crowd. Ri wondered if he should find the spy before going inside. He'd already applied the soul eye, but here Takashi started shouting that it was time to start the trial. He told everyone not to be afraid and to call for help if they encountered a strong enemy, as the association staff would help everyone. Ri was surprised that they had absolutely no strategy, and this Takashi was talking such nonsense. However, Ri thought it was only to his advantage. Ray had already guessed exactly who the spy would turn out to be, but he hadn't yet figured out how to deal with them. In the end, of the 107 players who took part in the challenge, all 106 participants turned out to be spies from the Dark Guild, with the exception of one, Ray. Takashi was actively escorting everyone inside the museum, reminding them of caution and safety. All the players went inside. Ri looked around and thought he looked very expensive. At that same moment, Ri noticed that all the players began to surround him from different directions, holding spray cans in their hands. All the players simultaneously started releasing gas and canisters directly at Ri, forming a huge explosion. Ri knew about this trap from the beginning, so he managed to fly upwards above the focus of the explosion. And right after that, Ri descended to the ground, killing everyone who had organized that explosion. There was no chance for them to escape. Having disposed of all of them, Ri said that they were very docile and fearless dogs, blindly raring to fight, not caring about the superiority of their opponent. At the same second, Takashi burst into the hall. He ran frantically and screamed, not realizing what had happened. Ri replied that all these people suddenly attacked him, and he had to calm them down. Takashi said it was some kind of horror and misunderstanding. He asked how Ri was feeling and if he was hurt. And immediately after he said that, he drew his dagger and prepared to strike. However, Ri instantly grabbed that knife with 2 fingers. Takashi couldn't move and didn't understand what kind of strength Ri had. Ray threw him back a couple of meters and told him that his weapon wasn't even a game item and Takashi wouldn't hurt any player with it. The rest of the surviving comrades ran up to Takashi. Ri looked at them and said that this farce was unnecessary since he knew they were all affiliated with the Dark Guild. Takashi smiled evilly and replied that since Ri knew everything, it was even easier. The other players heard this and asked Takashi what other Dark Guild there was, and didn't the order for this trial come from an environmental protection group? Takashi started laughing and replied that that was correct, and the environmental protection group is a business partner of the Dark Guild. Takashi spread his hands and suggested that everyone just discuss things quietly. He then looked into Ray's eyes and said that their priority was not to kill him, but to protect this place, and he would hate to become enemies. And also, if Ri agrees to cooperate, Takashi will arrange for him to be paid an allowance of 50K, maybe 100K. When the players heard this, they started shouting with discontent that he was offered 100,000 and they were only offered 30,000. Some of them heard about any fee for the first time at all. It made sense to Ray now, and in the past he would have likely fallen for such a scam too, but this time he had to decline. Takashi was surprised that Ri turned him down and said it was a shame, since now he would have to finish him off. Takashi turned to the players and said that he had a special offer. Only now, whoever kills Ri will get 100,000 extra. The players started running towards Ri at that very second, saying that they would destroy him. However, once they got as close to Ri as possible, he effortlessly used a technique and disarmed them. Takashi lashed out at Ri, saying that he was the former head of the judo club and Ray couldn't beat him. Ray turned around and disarmed the daredevil with 1 knee strike. Takashi fell to the floor. Ray immediately applied the soul-capturing skill, binding him with chains. Takashi couldn't move and screamed in pain. Ri turned around and noticed 2 players hiding. They began to beg Ri not to kill them. Ri figured they might know something about the Dark Guild, and it would be foolish not to take advantage of it. So he told them that he would not kill them if they cooperated. Ray called Rumi and told her that he had great news. They would now have 100 new co-guildmates. Rumi was surprised and asked if they now had to undergo re-education too. She warned that few of the 100 would be able to endure it. Ri replied that they were just ordinary rookies, and there was no need to re-educate them, but one head of the Association for the Protection of Humanity definitely needed their courses. Suddenly, at that moment, a sword shining with a dark, purple aura fluid. Ri noticed the attack in time and managed to fly up and dodge such a powerful blow. Ray landed, smiled, and looked at the balcony, saying that he was finally out. A stranger with a mask on his face stood on the balcony and asked how long ago Ri had noticed him. Ri replied that he had noticed from the moment he arrived. After all the players who had come were just extras. Ri also said that the stranger really stood out among these weaklings, and no matter how hard he tried to hide his powers, everyone else just paled in comparison. The stranger wondered how Ri was able to spot him so easily. He drew his 2 shining swords and pounced on Ri with incredible speed, asking if he could survive a fight against him. They faced off in an uneasy battle. Rei anticipating every attack and blocking it. The stranger was surprised and said that Rei was much stronger than he was in the game, as he parried his blows with a single dagger. Rei was confused as to how the stranger would know what he was like in the game, so he slashed his mask with a single swipe of his dagger. The mask fell off the stranger's face, and Rei recognized the man. He never thought he'd meet someone he'd spent time with in the game before the crash. Rei called him by his first name, Udo, and said he was glad to meet him. Udo replied that he was sorry it had happened under these circumstances, since he would have to cut off Rei's life anyway. After saying that, Udo took a pose to attack. Rei, meanwhile, took the mask off his face and asked if Udo had the strength to cut his life short. Udo used the activation of the two-blade skill at the same second and started yelling that Rei was leaving him no choice. With incredible speed, he attacked Rei and managed to wound him in the shoulder. Rei recognized that Udo's skill was really good, but not better than his own. After saying that, Rei activated the Soul Ice skill, and after analyzing it, he found out that his main class was Swordsman with 2 blades, and there was no subclass. Rei realized that the duration of Udo's super speed, given his level, would soon shorten, and Udo would run out of steam. Rei caught his opponent's momentum and delivered one powerful blow that sent Udo dashing to the ground, forming a hole underneath him. Rei came down to him and told him that Udo was strong, but his weapons weren't, and he wouldn't cut his life short with those swords. Rei then used the soul-capturing skill again and stilled Udo in chains. Udo tried to break free and couldn't understand what was going on. After all, for the soul-capturing skill to work, they must have a difference in levels. Rei smiled and replied that he was absolutely right, and they had a colossal difference in levels. However, afterward, Rei said that Udo was one of the best players he knew, and so he offered him to join him, as he would make millions with him, and the Dark Guild was not capable of that. Through the pain, Udo replied that he couldn't. Rei was surprised and asked why that was so. Udo replied that he couldn't tell. Then Rei said he should tighten his chains. Udo screamed in pain from hell that he couldn't tell, and if he did, he'd have to. Rei told him to keep quiet and keep talking, but Udo didn't give up. Then Rei asked him where Hisashi was right now. Udo almost cried at that moment. At one time, the game discouraged potential players with its complexity. It was not easy for casuals to survive, especially when it came to dungeons. So, in this game, it was important to have strong comrades who shared the same outlook on the game. Udo and his younger brother Hisashi were such companions. The bosses that Rei could easily kill alone, the three of them chopped them down, but when their level difference became too great, they stopped playing together. But Rei kept his contacts in the game. Meanwhile, the guys cooled down and sat down to talk quietly. Udo said that he hadn't expected to meet Rei under such circumstances. Rei asked where Hisashi was being held. After all, Udo lowered his head and said that he didn't know and that he wasn't even allowed to see him. Udo fell to his knees and began to beg for Rei to find out where they were keeping him, since Rei has the Soulsmith subclass and he's capable of doing it. Rei sighed and replied that he had that skill, but no longer in the game, but in the real world. He then stood up, walked over to a large expensive painting, and continued his speech, saying that now only money motivated him to work. Rei then turned to Udo, held out his hand, and said that he would have to empty the entire contents of his wallet. Udo was as shocked as possible. He put his head down and cried, begging for Rei to save his brother. Rei then asked if he had his brother's personal items with him. Udo pulled out Hisashi's cap and gave it to Rei, reapplied the Soul Search skill, and designated Hisashi as the target. The system immediately reported that the target was not detected because the target was already dead. Udo almost went crazy. He fell to the floor and started screaming that it was impossible. The system also reported that the target killer was Raven. Udo clenched his hand into a fist and said that he would kill the creep. Rei asked if he knew the man. Udo replied that he was the one who had taken his brother hostage and forced Udo to work for the Dark Guild. Udo's aura glowed with a dark color. He became extremely angry and started shouting that he would kill this animal with his own hands. He fell to his knees in front of Rei and promised that he would make as much money as Rei wanted, just so he could help avenge his brother. Rei said that he too was hurt by the news of Hisashi's passing, as he too was like a little brother to him. Udo looked at him with eyes full of tears and said that then they could go for revenge together. Ri passed him by and replied that he didn't have time for that, as money wouldn't make itself. Udo asked for him to stop, and at that moment, Ri got messages on his phone from Sakino. She asked if Ri had really fought the Dark Guild at the museum, and how he had even agreed to such a thing, and who had paid him. Ri was greatly surprised by such messages and couldn't understand where Sakino was getting his information about him from. He texted her that it was his personal initiative and asked if there was an order for him. Sakino replied that the government was looking for people to destroy the Dark Guild's base, and the reward is 1 billion yen. Ri was surprised that they were offering 1 billion for a routine elimination, so he asked how she knew about it. Sakino replied that the government had personally requested the help of the Wings of Creation Guild, so Ri needed to keep the information regarding this mission secret. Ri then asked why she was sharing this information with him if it was a secret. Sakino got angry and wrote that he wasn't a stranger to her, and also said that there were rumors that the guild headquarters held assets worth over 10 billion yen. And if the order could be fulfilled, the government would keep quiet about something there. Ri turned to Udo at the same second and asked if he was aware that Raven might be at the Dark Guild headquarters right now. Udo was surprised and replied that, of course, since Raven was the head of the Japanese branch of the Dark Guild, and it was unlikely that he had ever left his abode. Ri smiled widely and replied that there was a change of plans, and he would help Udo avenge his brother. At that very second, Ri sent a message to Takino that the Gold Farm Guild would take this order. After some time, Ri, along with Udo, set out to find the headquarters of the Dark Guild. Suddenly, Ri received a message from Sakino. She wrote that the local police had found the Dark Guild's base, and they were on their way. Ri asked her if their base was on the 12th floor. Sakino was surprised and asked how Ri had gotten that information since they had just gotten that information from the government. Ri wrote that he was personally investigating the Dark Guild and was headed there. Sakino asked that Ri help the police since he was already going there, because if the Dark Guild fought back, the police wouldn't be able to handle it. Ri immediately asked what the price was. Sakino offered 1 million per person for the safety of the Dark Guild members and also for the safety of the police officers. 1 million per person. Sakino also promised to discuss these terms with the government, but if refused, the Guild of the Wings of Creation would take payment. Ri agreed to those terms. Ri decided to inform Udo that the local police were also heading to the Dark Guild's base. Udo, of course, rejoiced at such news and suggested that they should hurry over to their place sooner rather than later. Ri said that he would go alone and for Udo to wait here since the Dark Guild doesn't know yet if Udo is alive or not. Therefore, Ri decided to hide this fact from them and take them by surprise. Udo realized the seriousness of this operation and agreed, promising that he would be waiting on the spot. As an admonishment, Udo asked that Ri be careful since if the police found them, the guild could set traps all over the building. Ri replied that he would keep that in mind. Ri approached the building where the base was located. However, the building was completely sealed off, and no one was allowed to enter. That didn't stop Ri. He lifted the tape and wanted to climb over, but a man stopped him and said that due to a gas leak, the passage to the building was temporarily sealed. Ri replied that the Guild of the Wings of Creation had personally asked him to join in the capture of the target and asked if he had the wrong address. The man immediately apologized for his rudeness and led Ri in the right direction. He led Ri to a room where negotiations between serious men in business suits were actively taking place and said that a player from the Wings of Creation Guild had arrived. One of the men immediately became aggressive and yelled that no backup was requested. He also looked Ri upside down and said that the slob wouldn't be any use anyway, and they'd handle it themselves. He then turned his back to Ri and, turning around, said that he was connected to the people at the top, so his orders were absolute, and that Ri dare not interfere. The man led a whole squad of police officers and gave him orders for them all to go forward. Ri watched from the sidelines and told one of the attendees that this was a bad idea. A few seconds later, there was an explosion on the top floor. Debris started falling on them, and Ri said he had warned them. Ri had to take matters into his own hands. He used the soul thread skill and blocked their floor so that the debris wouldn't collapse and the fire wouldn't continue. The man's eyes stopped in front of him at the debris that was flying at him. He couldn't believe they were saved. Ri then looked around the area and decided it was worth it to save the very male fool and the police officers. He flew in their direction. Ri landed and found the police officers lying motionless on the floor. He thought he was too late. However, at that moment, Ri heard the man coughing and realized that he could still help them. Ri looked at him and said that one man's life was worth 1,000,000 yen, and it would be a waste if he died here. Ri wrapped a golden thread around all the police officers and began to pull them out of there, lowering them to the ground. Ri did his thing and said that there was nothing more to do here, and he had to go. The people around him thanked him and couldn't understand who this player was. Ri came to Udo and said that he was done with all the chores. Udo was eating ice cream and said that he had somehow gotten through it quickly. Udo also handed Ri his favorite tea and asked how it went. Ri replied that the Dark Guild had already escaped and he had only wasted his time. He then stuck a pipe into the tea bag and asked that maybe the Dark Guild had some other base. Udo replied that he was only aware of one base and had no further information. Also, Udo said that the items the guild lent him, as well as the smartphone he threw away the same day he met Ri, could certainly go back to the museum trial and pick up at least a phone to get some information. Ri said it wasn't worth it, though, because then their location would be known, and besides, Ri already knew what to do. The guys continued on their way, and Ri said that it was hard to do criminal business and organize a hideout when you were at gunpoint with the police, and especially when there are cameras all over the city that can easily reveal the identity of any passerby. Then Udo asked that consequently, the Dark Guild would choose a place with minimal cameras and hard to find. Under this description, some dungeon with low levels to pass and low rewards would fit perfectly. Ri replied that that was correct, and he had already instructed his army of money hamsters to look for such a place. Udo was surprised and didn't understand what army he was talking about. Ri rolled his eyes and explained that he was talking about his guild, Gold Farm. He also added that Udo would, of course, be part of that team as well. He would need to work hard and bring in millions. Udo replied that Ri was not at all ceremonious about it. Suddenly, Udo had a question asking if they needed to call his army for backup. Ri replied that it was not necessary. They also have busy schedules and completely different tasks. At this time, the golden hamsters finished disguising the coins, and Ri told Udo that if he summoned them, he would disrupt their schedule and reduce his profits. At the same second, Ri received a message from the team that there were only 36 dungeons recorded in a month that no one could enter, and 7 of them were in nearby Tokyo neighborhoods. The only closed dungeon with constantly regenerating monsters is the Tower of Carnage, located deep in the mountains of Chiba Prefecture. The dungeon is located deep in the mountains in the Tower of Carnage. Ri realized that a dungeon where enemies eventually revive was the perfect place for a base. Given the difficulty level of the dungeon itself and the low level of the enemies, no special levels or items can be gained there. The dungeon is a place they wouldn't even think of going to, even given its dislocation. Ray told Udo that they'd have to go there. Udo replied that everything was already in place for that since Ri had asked to take care of it himself, knowing that it wouldn't be a long journey. Udo then pointed to one of the parked cars and said that this baby would survive the mountain road safely. The guys got in the car, and Ray told Udo to drive faster and not to worry about speeding tickets since he would solve everything. Hearing such words from Ri, Udo happily stomped on the gas pedal, and the car almost flew into the sky. Ray calmly sipped his tea and said that they shouldn't let them leave this time. Udo replied that he was damn right. The boy continued on their way and were already out of town. The road was quite long. Ri navigated the guidebook and told Udo to go straight ahead. Udo replied that there was no further road and asked if he should continue. Ray said he would handle it and ordered Udo to drive carefully and keep his speed up. Ray put on his illusory mask and Udo hit the gas. The car soared over the cliff. Then the car landed on a rocky road, and such a jolt made Ray's tea fall out of his hands. Udo was having fun with such an adrenaline rush. Ray used his skill and formed a defense around the car. They continued to roll downhill, and even knocked over a tree in their path. Finally, they stopped, and Udo said they seemed to have a flat tire. Ray got angry and said that he had told him to be careful, Udo winked and replied that the enemy wouldn't notice them at the foot of the mountain, and besides, he had such a ride at his disposal. Udo just couldn't help but make the most of it. The boys got out of the car and noticed a huge, beautiful building on top of the mountain. Ray wasted no time and slung his backpack on his back to continue on his way. Udo walked forward, but Ray stopped him and asked him if he had forgotten anything. Udo took a deep breath and said that it was cruel to carry heavy luggage after driving like that. However, Udo had no choice. Ray said that the backpacks contained weapons since the two of them were going up against an entire organization, and they needed to have an arsenal with them. The boys climbed up the rocky mountain, and after a while, the system reported that they had arrived at the Tower of Carnage. Along with Udo, he hid behind the trees to assess the situation at the tower gate. They noticed that there were 5 armed guards at the gate, but they did not exclude the possibility that there were others nearby. The guards were smoking cigars and discussing that it would be a good idea if a woman were brought to them now, but no girl would come to a place like this. One of the guards started laughing and said that even if some idiot showed up there, he would do anything to him since he no longer had the strength to endure it. The guards all started laughing loudly. Ray asked what kind of scum they'd recruited for security. Udo said that he had seen those idiots at the last base. Ray replied that that meant their assumption was correct. Ray also said that they could attack them right now and checked with Udo about their security situation. Udo said that the past base was disguised as an office that was rented in a multi-story building, but this one is different. Ray looked around the area and noticed that the bridges to this dungeon were all destroyed, and the dungeon itself was shrouded in a barrier. The only way in was through a gate. That's why they put strong soldiers at the gate, because by guarding the gates, you can completely protect yourself from intruders from outside. However, Udo said not to relax, as in addition to the guards at the gate, there might be others nearby, and at the last base, it was an entire hidden unit of 30 people. Ray then clarified how strong this unit could be. Udo replied that it was no stronger than them, but as far as he knows, there are 3 players in the Dark Guild who are equal to or even stronger than Udo. Their names are Jack. Udo visibly became nervous and said with a cold sweat on his forehead that these 3 would be the hardest to deal with. Ray smiled and replied that it would be even more fun with 3 players of equal strength. Udo looked at Ray with relief and said that since Ray was so optimistic, he was relying on him. Ray said it would be a shame if that trio ran away while they were fighting these little brats, since there's a 1,000,000 yen reward for 1 Dark Guild member. So, it's advisable to block the exit to avoid losing profits. Udo asked in surprise, that did Ray really come here for money? Ray replied that it couldn't be otherwise. Ray added that it wasn't just about the money, as if they didn't block that exit, the criminals might get away, including Raven. After saying those words, rage swept over Udo. He said that they needed to block the exit by any means necessary so that no creature would slip through. Ray agreed and said that the Wings of Creation could be enlisted for backup. However, if one were to contact Tsukino directly, there's a chance that the Dark Guild might find out about their plans. Then Udo said that he would have to hold them back until the Guild of Creation Wings arrived and asked Ray if the 2 of them could handle it. Ray smiled widely, looked him in the eye, and said, so. Udo didn't even doubt it. Ray then wrote a message to Tsukino that he had discovered the 2nd base of the Dark Guild. It was urgent to send the strongest players who could help in the blockade. Also, the fact that there might be a spy of the Dark Guild in Tsukino's guild could not be ruled out. So Ray asked her to send only those she trusts as herself. Ray then said that after sending the message, they could begin. Udo took a pose to attack. Ray started the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, and on the count of 1, Ray pressed send. Udo activated the super speed skill at the same second. Udo flew up to the guards and started disarming them one by one. The guards couldn't even realize what was happening. After straightening everyone out, Udo said that this heavy backpack had reduced his speed. Then he looked at Ray and said that in that case, he couldn't equal blame him for being slow. Ray threw off his backpack and told Udo not to whine as it was time to pull out their weapons. He opened the backpack, picked it up, and started spinning at an incredible speed. Thousands of those same disguised coins spilled out of the backpack. Ray then sighed and said that everything was ready. All that was left was to wait for them to come out. A security camera spotted Ri and Udo and alerted them that there were intruders on the premises, and they needed to be eliminated. Many soldiers immediately ran out of the tower. Udo grabbed his backpack, and Ray said, "Here comes his millions of yen," running straight into his hands. This amused Ri a lot. He looked at Udo and said that it was time to earn money. Ray then activated the coin blast skill. There was an explosion that caused the soldiers to start burning. Ri looked at it and said that, "Just as I thought." The weak explosion made everyone fall immediately. Some managed to survive. One of them warned the others to be careful, as they could not see anything because of the smoke, and the enemy could attack at any moment. At that same second, Ray threw a punch and said with a smile that they were very savvy boys. He then looked at Udo and said that he was doing pretty well and had already destroyed 10, and one of those was worth 1 million. Udo smiled broadly and replied that he was just getting started and the most fun was just ahead. However, at that moment, Ri was attacked from behind by one of the warriors. Udo started yelling that there was an attack from behind before Ri could even blink. Udo had already cut the enemy apart. Udo then turned around and said Ri had spotted the enemy and was purposely standing there waiting for Udo to finish him off. Ri replied that he guessed correctly and pointed to the camera, saying that he didn't want to put on a show and reveal all the trump cards to them. And also, Ri asked not to be called by his name, as there might be a microphone on the camera, and if there's no microphone, they can still read lips. Then the guys looked around, and Ri said they had done enough, and it was time to take away their view. He destroyed the surveillance camera. At this time, the guild leader and the others were watching what Ri had done. Raven, the head of the Japanese branch of the Dark Guild, asked his subordinates that they had come after all. The girl told him that one of the attackers was Udo, a mouse and a traitor to their organization, and the identity of the other attacker was unknown. One of those present said that they were running the identity of the other through the databases of the Japanese Adventurers Association, but so far no data had been found. Raven realized that if one of them was Udo, he had learned of his younger brother's death, so he betrayed them. Raven thought for a moment and said that all Udo and his brother were doing was getting in their way. He suddenly recalled a moment from the past when he had entrusted his younger brother with a special mission. Raven clarified if Hisashi could handle such a job. Hisashi replied that it wasn't about the complexity of the mission, but about what needed to be done. He didn't like the fact that his client's wishes required him to eliminate a target. He held a terrible grudge against it, so he came to Raven to tell him that this was utter nonsense. Raven got angry and said that it was his business to eliminate the target and get a decent reward afterward, and there shouldn't be a problem with that. Hisashi then asked if Raven knew that the client wanted to destroy the wings of creation. Raven replied that it was a funny joke. Then Hisashi started shouting that the target was his longtime friend from the time of the game. He is a healer with a kind and friendly disposition, and it is impossible to hold a grudge against such a person. Hisashi explained that the only motive for this murder was to hurt the guild of the Wings of Creation. Raven continued to stare out the window and remained silent. Hisashi continued to say that healers are valuable to each guild. They are weak on their own, and if a strong healer dies, it will hurt the organization. Raven laughed and replied that it was nonsense, since why would they want the Dark Guild to kill healers from other guilds, and they had better things to do. Then Hisashi told Raven, right to his face, that it looks like their occupation is to prevent passing the test, since only the Wings of Creation Guild is currently able to pass further tests. And once rid of them, no one else will be able to resist further chaos. Hisashi told Raven that he realized that it was far more profitable for their guild if countries were unable to pass the tests. Raven continued to stare out the window and replied that Hisashi was right, of course, and turned around and said that it would be much easier not to prevent the test from passing, but to simply wipe out an entire country. And this will only be possible if the Wings of Creation disappear, and they must be eliminated before a new trial arises. Raven let his dark threads go and wrapped them around Hisashi's leg. The boy started screaming that this was crazy. Raven replied that it didn't concern him either way, as his life would end here and now. Hisashi didn't understand what Raven was getting at, and in that very second, Raven activated the Shadow Path skill. He bound Hisashi with dark threads and began to squeeze him. However, Hisashi started laughing and shouting for Raven to kill him so that his older brother, Udo, would finally be free. Hisashi yelled that if he killed him, Udo would no longer obey them since Udo had been working for them for so long because of them taking Hisashi hostage. Raven smiled and replied that he would definitely find other leverage on Udo. Hisashi didn't give up and said that there was no way they would be able to subdue Udo through other means. Raven pulled out and activated his spear, telling Hisashi to think about why he was forbidden to communicate with his brother. Then he stuck a spear in the guy's heart and said his brother wouldn't even know of his agonizing death. And after that, Raven said he was even a little sorry because if Hisashi hadn't minded his own business, he would have lived a lot longer. Remembering these events, Koki told Raven that he had told him that he should have just cut off Hisashi's limbs and crippled him. Koki then smiled widely, fixed his mustache, and said that Hisashi would be a good new toy for him. Raven replied that if he left alive someone who knew their plans, there could be a leak, and he couldn't let that happen. Kuroki said that if their plan went well and Japan disappeared, he could warm his bones in a fancy resort. He was starting to think about whether to go to Hawaii. The boy Jack laughed and said that the old man already had his old man's plans for his life in his head. Jack also added that lying down at the resort gets boring after a day, but playing with godly toys is just the right activity for Kuroki. Koki got angry, jumped up, and started yelling that little Jack was yapping a lot today. One of those present tried to calm him down and told him that they could get promoted if they destroyed the country. A place in the head office was assured. Koki replied that he wasn't interested in paperwork and would rather be on the front lines. After all, it was more fun to kill people than to sit in a stuffy office, and it's good for your health. Raven listened to each and asked how the trespassers were doing. The girl reported that they had sent soldiers there, but the intruders had managed to overpower them all. Raven got up from his chair and said that it was obvious since Udo was there, and of course, the small mercenaries couldn't match him. He told the girl to tell the boss that they would handle it themselves. After that, Raven took his weapon and said that Koki and Jack would go with him. Koki was surprised that Raven was so serious. After all, those two rats wouldn't be able to do anything against them. Raven turned around and said not to take rodents slightly because a cornered rat could chew a cat's neck off. And on top of that, this guy they know nothing about. So, Raven decided to kill him as soon as possible, using the most of their powers. Meanwhile, Rei and Udo were trying to count how many warriors they had put down and how many millions they had made. Udo said that they'd gotten half of it right. Rei said that was fine, since there was still half to raise money. Raven came out of the tower. Rei noticed that Udo was getting very nervous and asked what was wrong. Udo said, and there he was coming out. Raven turned to Udo and said that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, and if he'd gotten this far, he already knew the truth about his brother. Fury overcame Udo. He said that Raven would definitely answer for his little brother's death. Udo applied the super speed skill. However, the system reported that the super speed skill could not be activated, and the skill rollback time is 3 hours, 25 minutes, and 52 seconds. Udo was very angry and decided to pounce on Raven and get revenge on him. After all, Rei watched from the side and thought that Udo had completely lost his head. However, he decided to let him do one reckless act today. However, Udo didn't even have time to fly to Raven when Jack appeared and cut him off using the wide cut skill. Udo spotted Jack and Koki. Jack laughed loudly and said that Udo was an idiot for coming all this way to be finished off. Kuroki intervened and told Jack that it was rude of him to make fun of Udo, as such a fool could only be pitied. It was a foolish thing to risk his life for a dead body. Udo could barely contain his anger and said that Raven had brought Jack and Koki with him. Rei asked who they were and said they could be blown up with coins. Udo turned to Raven and demanded that he explain why he had taken his little brother's life. Raven smiled and replied that there was no reason. The rat bit his master's hand and paid for what he had done. Udo looked at him angrily and asked if he had killed Hisashi because he didn't want to obey him. Raven's aura turned dark, and he asked Udo if he was as stupid as his brother, that he couldn't realize that useless rodents were supposed to be gotten rid of. Udo clutched his weapon with all his might and said that Raven would pay for daring to laugh his brother into the dirt. Jack and Koki surrounded this one, telling Udo to watch his back or else they'd go after his brother. Suddenly, reappeared with a chopping blow of his soul. He disarmed Kuroki and Jack, dropping them to the ground. Ri then looked at Udo and said that he could go, and Ri would deal with those creeps. Udo thanked Ri and turned his attention to Raven. He wanted to destroy him by any means necessary. However, Raven called him an idiot and asked him how he was going to take his life without his super speed. After saying that, Raven used the Ice Fortress skill. A wall of ice appeared in front of Udo. However, Udo said not to underestimate him. He gathered all his strength, flew to the top, and released a huge amount of energy using the thermal explosion skill. With a powerful punch, Udo managed to crack the ice wall, and he found himself facing Raven. Ray saw what happened and realized that things were bad. He immediately used a cut and coin blast towards Udo. There was an explosion, and Udo was thrown back a few meters. He got to his feet and screamed at Ri, asking why he had done it, continuing the battle with Kuroki and Jack. Ray said that Udo would thank him again. He asked Udo to turn around and see what he had saved him from. Turning around, Udo saw a huge ice pillar. He realized that if it wasn't for Ray, he would have been under the pillar. Ray shouted to him that he actually charges millions for saving a life, and after the mission, Udo would have to pay up. He asked how Udo could get revenge if he skated off. Raven turned to Ri and said that this was the first time he was seeing him, and he seemed to be the one who had thwarted their plans with the trial at the European Mansion and Museum. Ray preferred to play dumb and replied that he didn't know what he was talking about and that it wasn't worth it to talk nonsense. But Ri was sure that Raven knew about the Gold Farm Guild, but had no clue about his identity. Raven told Ri that he didn't understand why he would go against a strong organization and mess with a traitor, condemning himself to death. Ray laughed and asked what that was for. For the sake of making more money, of course. Raven was surprised by this response and asked if Ri had really decided to make an entire guild his enemy. Ri started laughing even louder and replied that there was nothing in this world more precious than money, so he was not embarrassed by anything. Ri then said that they were offering a 1 million yen reward for Raven's head, and besides, if he died, Udo would work for him for free. Ray gathered his energy and told Raven that he had once killed Hisashi for his guild's profit, and now it was time for him to die for Ray's money. Right after those words, Ri used the spiritual limit-breaking skill. The system notified Udo that the player Ray wanted to use the skill on him. The system also warned Udo that this skill required a quick reaction. Udo needed to press the green key to confirm. In the same second, the system notified that the spiritual burst skill was activated and the skill rollback time was reduced to 0 for the duration of the skill. Udo receives protection from the Ray player's powers. Ray looked at Udo and gave him the command to move forward. Udo immediately used his super speed and headed towards Raven. Raven got angry and said that it was very cheeky. He didn't expect Udo to be able to use super speed again. Meanwhile, Udo was confidently flying towards him. However, in a moment, an ice peak appeared in front of Udo. Raven applied ice arrows and asked, "Did Udo forget that he knew his moves better than anyone else?" Raven laughed loudly and said that Udo's speed and sword skills were indeed worthwhile. However, Raven was aware of his 3 weaknesses, and the first weakness is that Udo only fights at short range. Raven took advantage of this and almost succeeded in destroying him. Udo was very angry that Raven knew him so well. After all, he thought he was invincible with that attack speed. Raven said that Udo's second weakness was his low attack power, and after saying that, he pinned the guy down with his huge spear. Udo lashed out, but Raven kept saying that Udo's skill is time-limited, and Raven just needs to survive the time the skill is used. Udo realized that there was truth in Raven's words, and he was no match for him. But Udo believed that he too had a chance to win. Raven noticed that Udo had become pensive and said that he was reading him like an open book, so he shouldn't overthink things. Udo realized that he too knew Raven's basic advantages and only knew one skill to be wary of. This skill is a kickback skill. The skill increases the recoil of a blocked attack, and the person can attack with double the force. And due to Ray's power transfer, Udo's attack power is also increased. Hence, Raven's recoil is also increased. Therefore, Udo made the decision that he should attack until the moment he activated the skill. Raven was shocked at how this rat had such powerful strength. Udo was even amused by this. He realized that thanks to Ray's help, he could fight Raven as an equal. Udo's amusement made Raven angry. He told him not to get cocky. After that, Raven raised a spear and used the kickback skill. The spear stabbed into Udo's chest with tremendous force. He flew back a few meters and formed a hole in the wall from the impact. Raven smiled widely and said he would let Udo meet the same death as his brother. Suddenly, at that moment, from the back, the knife that Ray had launched at him flew at Raven. Raven noticed in time and managed to dodge the knife. It only scratched his cheek and stuck into the wall beside Udo. Raven got angry and started yelling for Ray to stay out of it since he was next in line anyway. Ray only smiled in response and said that this knife would come in handy for Udo. Immediately after saying that, Udo took out a knife from the wall and ran up to Raven, stabbing the knife into his stomach. Raven couldn't understand how it happened, and Udo said that he knew his moves best, so he had to learn new tricks from Ray. Udo pulled out his knife, and Raven collapsed to the ground. Udo was victorious in this fight. Udo looked at all this and cried. He said that he was able to avenge his little brother, Hisashi. Udo remembered all the happiest moments of his life when he and his brother were together. After a few seconds, the system notified that the effect of the spiritual limit-breaking skill was over, and Udo's physical strength returned to normal. An exhausted Udo collapsed on Ray's shoulder and said that he still wanted to defeat Raven on his own. Ray backed him up and replied that he wasn't much help to him, and that Udo had taken Raven's life on his own. Udo was very weak. However, he asked Ray what was up with Jack and Kuroki. Ray smiled and replied that the two who came with Raven were lying on the sidelines over there. A couple of minutes ago, Ray stood watching Udo and Raven fight, but Jack and Kuroki wouldn't let him just watch. They approached Ray and began to apply their skills. Jack immediately applied the death aura skill. Ray was even surprised. He knew it was a skill to create a space where the attack power would be increased. Jack then applied a wide cut, and Kuroki applied a piercing charge attack. At that moment, behind Ray's back, Kuroki laughed evilly and asked Ray how he would be able to dodge without a fulcrum. Now, Ray had had enough of playing these games. He destroyed Jack with one swipe of his hand, and then went to Kuroki. Ray flew up to him and put a knife to his neck, saying that only an idiot would part with his weapon during a fight. After saying that, he slit his throat. Meanwhile, Udo told Ray that he instantly took out those mutts. Ray smiled and replied that it wasn't anyone's fault that they had such a huge difference in strength. Udo was sitting against the wall and couldn't move, so he apologized to Ray and said he couldn't help him anymore. Ray smiled and said that so would make the money himself. Suddenly, an unknown man appeared in front of them and said that they would have no vacation. He stood with a huge hammer in his hands and turned to Udo, saying that he never would have thought Udo could defeat Raven. Behind this man's back were a dozen more soldiers. Ray realized that the reinforcements from the Dark Guild seemed to have arrived faster than the Creation Wings. Ray walked over to the man and said with a smile that one person was worth 1,000,000 yen, and there were even more than 20 of them here. Ray's aura shone brightly at this moment. He was thinking about money, and he liked that this wasn't a dungeon of some kind. It didn't take a minute before Ray was done with them all. He went up to the man and said that he looked formidable, but in reality, he was a weakling. Ray didn't care, though, because he was going to get his money. Just after those words, a convoy of black cars drove into the tower. Ray said that the wings of creation had arrived. He immediately removed the illusionary mask from his face so that there would be no unnecessary questions or suspicions. Tano came out of the car and told Ray in surprise that he had done a great job here. She then looked around and asked if the two of them had managed to block the Dark Guild's retreat exit. Ray replied that it wasn't particularly difficult. Sakino then asked where his partner was. Ray pointed his finger at Udo and said that he was lying there. Udo said that they had somehow miraculously managed to hold out. Sakino replied that it must have been a tough battle. Sakino gave a command to her men and said that from now on, the Wings of Creation would also help in the blockade. One of the members of the Wings of Creation Guild said that the blockade and such complications were unnecessary because all the bad guys were sitting inside, and they should just go in and kill them. Another of the guild members also supported the guy and said that the strongest fighters of the guild had come here, and together they would definitely do well. Sakino calmed everyone down and said that this operation was commanded by Rei, and disobeying his orders would be punishable. However, the conversations between the guild members did not stop, and then guild member Hasakino intervened. She started yelling for everyone to shut up since Sakino had clearly told everyone to listen to Rei. One of the men told Heiso not to interfere. However, the girl put him on the spot and asked him if he really thought he could shut her up because she was a woman. Rei intervened and said that their opponent's strength lies in numbers, so one must not act indiscreetly. Also, Rei said that if anyone had any objections, they could speak up, since Rei was not going to cooperate with anyone who didn't like his ideas, and also he wouldn't be responsible for their lives. He then asked for a show of hands from all those who agreed to his terms. Everyone agreed, but Rei asked that Udo keep an eye on the two who were initially against it. Rei then gave a clear order for all the captives to be sent to the guild branch. They all camped there in friendship and cooked a bunch of delicious food. Sakino sat down to eat a marshmallow and said that it had been 3 hours since they had arrived, and the Dark Guild guys were in no hurry to come out. Rei grilled the meat menacingly and said that they must have figured out that reinforcements were coming to them and that this fight was going to endure, but they couldn't sit here for long as the food supply would run out at some point, and all they could do was wait. Udo took a bite of a piece of steak and said that here was some delicious grilled meat they had. Rei clarified that they brought the creation wings. Sakino smiled and said that a blockade couldn't be survived without good food and pleasant company. Hasakino supported her and said that they could wait as long as they wanted in comfort. Sakino stood up from her chair, looked up, and said that, however, their barbecue was coming to an end, as she was notified that 2 suspicious men were approaching them. Rei immediately took off his apron. However, the guild member said again that there was no need to panic since there were 2 of them, and that meant they were going for reconnaissance, not battle. Rei took a bite of meat and replied that when it comes to players, it's quality over quantity that matters, and 2 strong fighters would cause more trouble than 100 weaklings. Rei then turned to Udo and asked if he had any idea who the 2 people might be. Udo replied that there were people in the guild far stronger than Raven, codenamed Beta, Gamma, and Alpha. About these people, Udo only knew their code names and no more information. Sakino then showed Udo the video that the reconnaissance team had sent her. 2 guys were seen in the video, and Sakino asked if Udo knew them. However, Udo replied that he was seeing them for the first time, but given the position of the Dark Guild, Udo assumed it could very well be Beta and Gamma. Rei realized at this moment that there was 1 strong player left in the castle, and the other 2 right now wanted to conduct a takeover of their group. Sakino, meanwhile, suggested that Rei split up. She would take 1 player and Rei would take the other, and the others could handle the third. Sakino assumed that way they could handle 3. Udo warned everyone to be careful since the only one he'd met of the 3 was Alpha, and that was the only player he thought was creepy, even though he'd seen a lot of them before. Rei then turned to Sakino and said that since the enemy was so strong, the payment would have to be doubled. Sakino laughed and replied that he was already dreaming. Rei said that if that was the case, he could keep hitting weaklings instead of this. Rei then turned to Yo and said that he was leaving him in charge here, while they were busy with those 2. Sakino ordered everyone to get ready. They approached the gate, and suddenly a flock of crows flew from the forest. No one realized what was suddenly happening. Sakino immediately ordered everyone to retreat. A huge red ball appeared at the gate, which swept through the gate and left a huge trail of flame. The guild members began to echo and ask if everyone was alive. It turned out that some were badly injured. No one could understand what kind of destructive force it was. Sakino ordered that the healers immediately treat all the injured. The same 2 guys were standing at the gate. One said to the other that they were still alive and maybe we should hit them again. Sakino yelled to them that they definitely wouldn't fall for it a second time. Udo said they would fight the 2 of them. Sakino replied that it wouldn't work that way. She flew upwards and applied the Hell Vortex skill. A fireball attacked those 2, and Sakino said she could handle them on her own. Suddenly, the man on the roof said that it was uncivilized to make noise in someone else's house. And even at night, they didn't think at all that they were preventing him from admiring the beautiful full moon. Sakino was fighting two strong players. One of them was surprised that she was that good and immediately realized that she was the head of the Wings of Creation Guild. Meanwhile, Hash was fighting the second one. The one was also surprised that they had strong women in their guild. Hoshino noticed the same man from the roof coming at Sakino and warned her. He approached Sakino and said that if it wasn't for that girl, she would have lost her head by now. He asked if all the 10 excellent ones were such weaklings. And when it comes to monsters, they're certainly good, but they lack experience in real combat. Sakino got angry and replied that she shouldn't rate 10 excellent, since she had plenty of experience in actual combat. Suddenly, he flew up and said that she didn't realize that he wasn't talking about experiences against monsters but battles against humans. At that moment, another flew up, activating his skill. He released an energy needle at Sakino and wounded her. She fell to the ground, pulled out the needle, and couldn't understand why everything was swimming in front of her eyes. The system immediately reported that Sakino's player was under the status of lethal poisoning. The guild healers instantly reacted and used the mass healing skill. Sakino only got worse. The healers couldn't understand what was going on and why it didn't work. One of the enemies laughed loudly and said that there were no healers who could cure her of his poison. Then Sakino raised her weapon up and said that in that case, she would just kill him until the poison spread throughout her body. However, he managed to dodge the fire and began to laugh that her kick was so strong. After all, such fierce attacks would only work against monsters, and there was no point in them if she couldn't hit. Sakino didn't stop and applied the infernal vortex. The enemy started laughing again and saying that he had already spoken. He ironically asked Sakino what was the point of her attacks if he was able to dodge them. At that moment, a guild member attacked him from behind. He applied the Hammer of Destruction skill. The enemy was angry that the jerk had charged at his arm. The other guild members appeared and applied the Precision Arrow and Circular Slash skill. Sakino smiled and said that skills aimed at area attack were only effective against weak and inexperienced targets, and a magic attack with the fire element can disorient the enemy, but he can also easily dodge it. In such a case, you should use numerical advantage to corner the enemy. Completely exhausted, Sakino asked, "Did you really think I was a complete idiot and hadn't prepared for this?" Suddenly, Sakino fell to the ground. The guild members instantly ran over to her, and at this moment, the system reported that due to the death of player Cho Fong, the status of fatal poisoning would be removed. Sakino woke up, and a team member told her that blinding the enemy with a fire flash was a brilliant idea, and her strategy worked. Sakino replied that they had practiced for a reason, and the power of the Wings of Creation lay not in one person. Meanwhile, Udo was fighting the second one. He used the thermal lunge technique. The enemy told him that he had certainly heard that the rat had betrayed them. However, he did not think he would prove weaker than him. He then assessed the situation and realized that Heiso was the main threat. Her weapon is a dagger. Possible class: Elite Thief. Lives in Mizano City. 28 years old, single, former member of a theater troupe. Her physical abilities are on the level of a normal human. She is one of Seiko's closest aides, but she has no combat experience. This was all the information the enemy had about her, yet he couldn't understand why he couldn't even hit her. And as soon as he attacked her, Udo started breathing down his back, and they attacked him at the same time. The agents didn't tell him she was good at fighting. The enemy decided to gather himself and used his assault blade. Now he had only to shorten the distance. However, at that moment, he was tied up by threads. He couldn't understand how this was possible since the agent had reported that this skill belonged to Rei Endo. Heiso tied it with golden thread and began to pull it down. Then she used the skill of soul thread, small flame. The enemy was burned alive. Those around him could not understand how such a thing was even possible. Heiso then turned to Rei standing behind her and said that he did a great job. Rei put his hand over his heart and said that he shouldn't be grateful. After all, she did a great job. The guild members were shocked and couldn't understand what was even going on. This catches up with the latest installments of this story released so far. so please expect some delay before the next part gets released. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider to leave a like and subscribing to the channel. You can also support me further by becoming a patron or a member of the channel if you've got that extra dough. Check out some of my other similar series while you wait. Until next time,